Tyler pulled his little white pickup, the one that said Stanley's Home Healthcare, into the driveway of 385 West Elizabeth Street. He had a lot of geezers on his route, but Mr. Kearney was the one he actually looked forward to seeing every week. Today was also a very special day. Mr. Kearney, according to his brother, had been asking for Tyler since he got up. He was stepping out today, he said, and he wanted to see his favorite nurse one last time. Tyler had worked as a home health nurse for years, and he found the work to be rewarding. Not in the way that most people would consider nursing to be rewarding. Tyler didn't like people. He actually felt that the best thing many of his clients could do would be to die. He didn't enjoy his work because he was helping people or easing their suffering. At the end of the day, Tyler hadn't become a nurse out of any misguided ideas of helping or easing or even curing anything. It was just the easiest excuse to touch them. Not in a weird way. Tyler wasn't a pervert who liked to prey on the weak. No, Tyler had discovered at a young age that when he was touching someone, skin to skin, he got a little more than just a sense of closeness. Tyler had cried a lot as a baby. His mother often said so, and it had led her to keep her distance. Tyler's mother had been a nurse too, and her busy schedule had led to a long line of faceless nannies and professionally cold caregivers that watched Tyler until she could come home and take a few hours with him before bed. Tyler's mother was a lot like these so-called professionals. She didn't like having a kid who wasn't happy to see her, who didn't laugh and smile and say her name, a kid who reminded her of his father, who had left before he had even been born. Some of this detached selfishness was probably thanks to her, but there had been a very good reason that Tyler had cried any time she had held him. Tyler could see things that she kept deep down in her mind, and when she picked him up, his childish mind couldn't make heads or tails of them, and they had frightened him. That's what Tyler assumed, at least, because he couldn't remember that far back. His first conscious memory of exchange was when he was 4. He'd been staying with his grandparents for the day, something that became more and more common as his mother began to date again, and he had nearly fallen down the stairs on their front porch. His grandfather had caught him by the wrist when he tumbled, right before he would have bashed his head on the bottom step, and he caught a quick, harsh glimpse of a man burying something on the edge of the property. It was a box, but whatever was in it, Tyler wouldn't find out for many years to come. His grandpa had set him on his feet and asked him if he was okay, and Tyler had nodded as his mind began to put 2 and 2 together. He wore a lot of sweaters and long sleeves after that, realizing that skin-to-skin contact was necessary for the transfer. He didn't start using the power for more than little peeks into people until he was in high school. A bump in the hallway showed him that one of the football players who liked to pick on him was seeing another member of the football team romantically. He used this information to stop the bullying and, indeed, to make him his personal fist against a few other people who were bullying him. He discovered that he could look at people's secrets, at their deepest thoughts, and it helped him get ahead. Suddenly, Tyler knew things that no one should, and he could use those things to get what he wanted. He took people's secrets, he stole their treasures, and he blackmailed them with their sins. He did all this with a touch, and it served him well throughout his life. It was a wonder that the black site didn't take notice of him, but he managed to slip under the radar and make it to adulthood with all the little secrets he had collected. As he entered adulthood, he followed his mother's example and went to school to be a nurse. It wasn't hard. He could get the answers with little more than a bump or an errant foot, and it stuck with him. What's more, Tyler discovered that he could retain the information that he stole. It helped him get through nursing school, and after graduation, it helped him better his lot considerably. Tyler knocked on the front door, and Roger Kearney smiled as he saw the bulky man in the red scrubs. "Good morning. He's been asking for you, T. Started asking right about breakfast. He says today's the day, and he wants to talk with you one last time." Tyler smiled. "Is he sure? His vitals looked good yesterday. Maybe it's just gas again." Roger shook his head. "Nope. He says he's stepping out today. He can just feel it." He let Tyler in, the shoes staying at the door, as he went down the hall to the room that Mr. Kearney had been staying in for the last year and a half that Tyler had known him. He had been staying there for closer to 5, ever since his cancer refused to be treated with radiation and the other drugs that the docs usually gave you. But hospice had only been something that they talked about above a whisper since the year before. Mr. Kearney had been through a couple of nurses, but he asked for Tyler by name, and he was one of a few patients that Tyler enjoyed seeing. He was one of the few that Tyler didn't use his power on. He was one of the few that Tyler didn't take advantage of. Tyler had never discovered empathy, and healthcare hadn't helped with that. As he worked with the hospice patients on his route, changing bedpans and cooking meals, he would learn things about them. He would learn which old men had done things with little girls. He would learn which old ladies had money buried in mayonnaise jars in the backyard. He would learn who had a checkered past and who had secrets too dark for polite company, and he would use it to his advantage. If it was a hidden treasure, something he didn't think the family would miss, he would take it. If it was a secret, he would use it to get money from the oldsters of their family. He was never violent about it, but he rarely needed to be. He could just mention that he knew it and threaten to tell if they didn't make it worth his while. Most of them were so surprised that he knew it all that they paid him on the spot. No one had ever complained, and if they threatened to, then he would threaten to tell. In the end, all of them paid what he wanted, and what Tyler wanted, he got. He knocked on the bedroom door, and Mr. Kearney cackled his name as he told him to come in. Mr. Kearney lay in his bed as the machine made a soft noise beside him. When Tyler had first met him, he had still had some meat on his bones, but time had not been kind to him. He looked like a skeleton in striped pajamas, and he smiled wetly as he turned his head to look at Tyler. Mr. Kearney looked like he was on his way out, and Tyler had to admit that the old guy might be right. "I'm glad you made it," Curdy said, wheezing a little as he reached for his oxygen mask. "You kidding me?" Tyler said as he took a seat. "Who else am I going to talk to about baseball? What's all this bullshit about you dying? You fit as a fiddle." "Yeah," Curdy wheezed. "A fiddle in a concentration camp, maybe." He took a long pull from the oxygen mask, and his chest rose and fell like the bags they used when they did CPR. "Nah, T. I'm on my way out. Before I go, though, I wanted to talk with you." He turned to look at him, and Tyler could see something in his eyes. Was it fear? Apprehension? He didn't know, but Tyler supposed that he would be a little scared too if his time was running out. The old guy didn't sound scared of croaking, though. He was scared of something, but Tyler didn't think it was of dying. "I haven't been entirely honest with you. When I saw your name pop up on the list of nurses, I thought it was deja vu. I mean," another puff off the mask, "no one gets that unlucky, but I guess it was luck on my part. I mean, what are the odds you would turn out to be the same kid from before?" Thomas felt his eyebrows knit together. "What are you talking about, sir?" Mr. Curdy took another pull off the oxygen mask, sighing as he lay back. "I'm rambling. Sorry, kid. Let me start at the beginning. You can do something special, can't you? Maybe it's telekinesis, maybe it's mind reading. The site wasn't really sure, and our equipment was kind of old, even when I was new. He took another pull off the mask, and Tyler felt a little chill run through him. You skipping your meds, Mr. Kearney? You aren't making a lot of sense. Kearney shook his head. It's fine, kid. You're too old for the site to come after you, and no one's gonna believe a dying old man if I spill the beans. Doesn't matter. I didn't call you here so you could verify what I already know. What I wanted to tell you is that I know, and you were only having this conversation because I failed in my mission on April 14th, 1993. The only one I ever failed on. He took a pull from the oxygen mask, and Tyler felt his fingers grip the arm of his chair. Mr. Kearney, what are you... Don't interrupt me, kid. I haven't got long, and I need to get it all out. You told me once that you liked finding out secrets, and this one's a biggie. I told you I used to work for the government, right? You know, I retired from my job, and they still pay my health insurance and all, but the sector I worked for is a little different, I suppose. Technically, we worked for the Department of Defense, but good luck finding us on an expense report. No, I was employed by an entity known as the Black Site, or Two Trees they call them sometimes. Specifically, the 12th one. Black Site 12 is interested in using kids with special powers to help maintain security, but I don't think most people know what they're securing us from. Anyway, I was with a group called Acquisitions, but we always called ourselves Snatchers. We grabbed kids, most of them from orphanages or halfway houses, and brought them to the site. It was high-profile work, but my unit never got picked up by the cops. I had to run when a parent caught us. We were always professional, always successful, least until it came time to snatch you. Tyler could feel his pulse in his wrist. What the hell was this old man talking about? He'd been right. No one would believe any of this if he tried to tell them, because Tyler didn't believe it himself. Of course, there was an easy way to verify it, but Tyler wasn't quite sure he dared. What if Mr. Kearney was right? If Tyler had saw someplace full of kids, saw Mr. Kearney taking them, what the hell would he do? We got orders from Security Chief Mansfield, and after surveilling you for a while, it was decided that we'd get you on the way home Thursday. You always walked home after school, and your mother always came home at 6, so we weren't afraid of being interrupted. I was going to be doing the snatching. My partner Doug was there to talk to parents and drive the car. And when you got off the bus, we were ready. The hair on the back of Tyler's neck stood up. He remembered this. When Mr. Kearney had rattled off the date, Tyler felt something tickle at the back of his mind. But now, the memories came flooding back for the first time in years. April 14th, 1993, had been the scariest day of his life. How had he forgotten it? It had made him careful after that, made him more watchful. He couldn't imagine how he could have ever forgotten it, but he supposed the edges had softened after a while. Nothing had happened, not really, but apparently something had happened. His instincts had been working, but Tyler had convinced himself that they hadn't. He'd been 9, and his mother had finally told him that he was old enough to get himself on and off the bus. She had given him a key and had made him promise not to talk to strangers, and told him to lock the door behind him. They had moved recently, his mom wanting to live a little more independently from the judgment of her parents, and she had drug her only son along so that she could feel like she wasn't shirking her responsibilities. It hadn't lasted long. By the time Tyler was 11, he was living with his grandparents again because his mom had a new boyfriend. But the 2 years that they had lived together in the house in Chapel had been nice. Not so nice that day, though. "You got off the bus and headed up the sidewalk as it pulled off. We pulled up behind you then." He'd been heading for home, thinking about what to watch on the little TV in the kitchen as he did his homework, when the hairs on the back of his neck went up. Someone was watching him. Someone was after him, and he remembered increasing his speed a bit so that he could get home faster. He could hear the soft purr of an engine not far behind him, not like the usual growl of a car going its usual 30, and he felt a breeze as he stepped off the sidewalk and into the neighbor's front yard, cutting across it to his own house. "I'd meant to grab you off the sidewalk, quick snatch and grab, but you stepped out of the way too quickly. I had the door open, my fingers brushed the strap of your bag by the tips, and I swore under my breath as I was forced to improvise." The sound of shoes hitting the pavement had stopped Tyler and made him turn. The man was suddenly running towards him, a big blonde man in a blue suit, and Tyler had started running. Somehow he knew if this man caught him, it would be very bad, and he thundered up the steps to his house like a horse. He had the key in his hand and rammed it home, unlocking the door before running in and slamming it behind him. The man had been at the bottom of the stairs, sprawled across the boards and looking up. He had caught one of his loafers on the steps, and Tyler could see the tear in his knee of his pants as he tried to get up. Tyler slammed the door in his face and locked it, running to the kitchen to get the phone and call for help. The cord joggled and bounced behind him as he came to peek out the living room window. But as the operator picked up to ask about his emergency, he saw no one trying to get through the door and shakily hung up the phone as he crouched in the living room, preparing to hit redial if he saw them again. "I figured you had called the cops, that being what they teach all you kids when you're in trouble, and I hightailed it to the van. We got out of there, and when we called in to report, they told us to never mind. They said they had another kid, someone Team 6 had picked up, and they didn't need you anymore. Your name was floated a few more times, but the science guys didn't think you were up to snuff. I figured that was the last I'd see of you. I'd snatched and lost, but when I saw your name in the book, I picked it out of curiosity. First time I saw you, I knew it was you. It's the kid. The kid. The eyes were the very same." He and Tyler sat there for a moment, the two of them silent, and then Tyler asked the question he had kicked around since Mr. Curdy started talking. "Why are you telling me this?" "'Cause I thought you should know. I'll be dead by dinner. I got a pretty good feeling about that. And you aren't the only reminder of my old sins. This cancer in me isn't natural. It's left over from the black side. Something about being around that place and interacting with all those kids. It's my burden. It's my reward for what I've done. And I'll gladly die for it. I did it for my country, for the secrets they keep from all those kids before they spring it on them." "And what secret is that?" Tyler asked, not able to help himself. He sat back a little as Mr. Kearney held out a hand. We suspected that what you had was touch activated. At least we did after observing you. Go on. Get it for yourself. Tyler's hand shook a little as he reached out, but when he took the old man's wrinkled starfish of a hand in his head snapped back and his eyes rolled up. This was different than it usually was. He saw things he didn't want to remember. He saw the cold, sterile halls of the black site, the kindergarten, the dorms, the kitchens, the distraction rooms, heard the voice of Cutter, and shivered as the voice of a corpse that now ran the place spoke to him. Worst yet, there was something worse than all of that. Something much worse that awaited all of them in the end. They didn't know it, but some of them would learn about it, and it would end them. The rest of them would be used up, Tyler breathed. Mr. Kearney took his hand back and pulled from the oxygen mask. You're a monster, Tyler breathed, and the old man nodded. I am what I am. I'm too old to change it now. Why did you tell me? Tyler asked, feeling those memories etch themselves next to the others he kept there. Doesn't matter, Kearney said. It's your secret now. Tell it, keep it, do whatever you want with it. At the end of the day, it won't be any use to me anymore. Tyler stumbled out then, feeling the knowledge weigh on him even then. Damn you, he whispered, teeth gritted as he stumbled out of the house. He needn't have. It was very likely that Mr. Kearney was already damned. Roger looked confused as Tyler ran from the house, and he stood on the porch and watched as Tyler fled up the road. Tyler wondered if the man knew any of this, but he doubted it. There was no way someone could live with and care for someone after knowing a thing like that. Tyler got the call that afternoon that Mr. Kearney had died, and he had to stop himself from saying good. 'Cause it wasn't good. Now it was Tyler left to keep this terrible secret as he sat in his apartment and chewed it over. He wished the old man hadn't passed it on, and it made him wonder if he'd ever be able to take another secret again. In the end, it hadn't been empathy that had got Tyler, but plain old yellow gut fear that broke him from peeking. You know how it is sometimes. You don't really go looking for anything. You mindlessly scroll for hours and hours as you consume content by the handful. TikTok and YouTube Shorts have allowed us to devour as much or as little as we want to, and it's opened up a whole new world for us as we sit comfortably on our couch or lay in bed fighting sleep. Before TikTok, I had no idea of all the kooky things that people could get up to and all the fascinating skills you could learn through storytelling. Doomsday prepping, making your own solar panels, how to dye your pets different colors, ways to grow vegetables in different climates, and that was just a handful of things I ran across. There's a lot of brain rot in there too, but that was just the price you paid for the useful bits that you ran across. That was how I stumbled across The Wild Man. The Wild Man was a TikTok channel about a guy who lives rough in the middle of nowhere, Arkansas. The place he lives really doesn't have a name. He just calls it the Pine Barrens, and he lives in a tent in the woods with his pet raccoon, Scampers. He hunts and fishes and mostly just survives off the land, laying back supplies for winter every year. You wouldn't have thought it would be terribly interesting, but he does so many cool survival things, and he has the most soothing voice you've ever heard come out of a man his size. He starts every video standing in front of the camera with his clothes made out of buckskin and a ridiculous-looking coonskin cap on his head that probably started life as one of Scamper's relatives, waving and smiling his gap-toothed smile. Well, hello there, forest friends. he would say as he waved at us. Forest friends is what he always called his viewers in his videos, and some of them have put it on t-shirts and sell them on his behalf. It sure did rain buckets last night, so today we're going to go check on the catch barrels and see how much rainwater we've got for the coming months. He stepped forward and grabbed the camera as he headed off into the woods and went around his campsite to check the large wooden barrels he used to collect rainwater. One of the previous videos had shown him making the barrels, and they looked like the big casks that people used to store wine or beer in. He had about 5 of them. Most of them were almost completely full of rainwater after the rainstorm ASMR he had done the night before. He smiled, telling us how it would be great for the coming hot months when the rain was a little scarce. He sealed up 3 of them, burying them half in the ground, before saying goodbye and hoping we'd take care of ourselves until next time. Most of his content was like that, just very chill forest things while he and his raccoon pet went about their day-to-day activities. They fished, they collected birds' eggs, and he showed us how to track deer by their signs and how to build fires that wouldn't get out of hand. He cooked meals with things that he scavenged, meat mostly, and I was surprised at the amount of edible plants that he taught me about. His content wasn't unique by any stretch of the imagination, but I really loved to watch it when I found a new video. He had longer videos on YouTube where he taught people how to do survival things, but I found myself mostly consuming his TikToks because I could binge watch them in under an hour. His voice was nice to listen to, and I've actually tried a few of the things that he talked about doing at his little campsite. The bucket on my back porch is growing a good crop of worms, and the rainwater collector in my backyard is watering my homemade garden nicely. So don't tell the government, because I'm pretty sure it's illegal. I wondered, when I first discovered him, how he got the things he used, and he must have read my mind because he had a video about going into town and trading some of the things he made for money and supplies. He must have made a decent living at it because he also had a P.O. box where people sent him things. He slept in a tent that was graded for conditions in Everest because a fan had thought he might need some help through the cold months. He had a Coleman stove that he cooked on sometimes, also provided by a fan, and there were various other things that he had that he certainly hadn't foraged for. I suppose that there was also the cell phone that he shot his videos on, too, though that was a mystery that he would soon solve, to our detriment and his. It started innocently enough with something I thought I had made a mistake about. "Well, hello, forest friends," he said one day, his shirt off and his arms slimy with clay. "I'm just making some bowls if you'd like to join me." Heck yeah, I thought, as I settled in to watch him make clay bowls. He had some clay that I imagined he had found at the river, and he was forming and molding them when I noticed something in the background. It was hard to see, kind of a nothing discovery, but it was a shoe sitting beside his tent. Not just any shoe either, but a Nike running shoe. I don't know why it seemed to stand out to me, but I rewound the video a couple of times to look closer at it. The shoe was too small for him. The wild man wore a size 14 and often complained that he had to get deer hides for moccasins about twice a year, and this looked like it would barely cover one of his big old toes that he now had on display as he worked. What's more, I thought there was some discoloration on the shoe, something dark, but I couldn't see it well enough to be sure. Wild Man made about 8 big bowls, saying he would make lids for them and seal the food in them, before telling us to take care of ourselves and to be respectful of nature when we had reason to be within her. "The forest can be dangerous for those who don't respect it," he added, looking good-naturedly at the camera. That was a new one, I thought. I went back to doom-scrolling. I had 3 more hours of work to get through, and my work hadn't quite filled the day like they had planned. I went to his profile, and it seemed the wild man had been quite busy that day. He had about 10 new videos out since yesterday, and I watched him hunt for a couple of deer, fish some, play with Scamper, smoke the fish and the deer that he had caught, and do an ASMR in the middle of the night, and go for a walk after dark as the crickets and the nightbirds called out around him. The video, to me at least, didn't feel like they were in order. I thought that the hunting video seemed to be in the early morning, the fishing in the mid-morning, and the cooking in the early afternoon. That wasn't weird in of itself. People upload videos all the time that aren't in order, but it was the comments on the cooking video that made me stop and scroll a bit. He had fish crisping on a stick over a fire that he had prepared, the deer meat sitting on a rock as he prepared to salt and store it, but then there was something on another rock near the deer meat. It didn't look the same. It looked, in fact, like pork. Some of his subs thought the same thing, and they asked what tree he had found the bacon on. The wild man had commented that it was just deer meat from an earlier kill, but some hunters said that if that was deer meat, then they wouldn't eat it because it didn't look right. Too pale, the comments said, but the wild men told them it had tasted fine. A little strange, but nothing to write home about, and certainly nothing to keep people awake at night. No, the thing that kept me awake was what I found on his YouTube channel. The video of him walking in the woods was the usual 5 minutes of him crunching along through the leaves, stopping to listen to the quiet nighttime sounds around him, and then progressing on before repeating it. He would point out the sounds of frogs and crickets, small birds and night creatures, and then move on through the crispy brush to find his next stop. At the end of the TikTok, there was a message that said I could watch the whole 3-hour video on YouTube, so I clicked over to his channel and put it on in the background while I worked on some last-minute paperwork. I liked having noise while I worked. It made me more productive, I think. So I listened to his big old deerskin moccasins as they crunched through the underbrush, talking about birds and squirrels and frogs as I put numbers into a report and information into a PowerPoint that would go along with it. About an hour and 45 minutes in, he stopped suddenly and gasped quietly. Who could be out here during such a dry season? With a fire too? Man, what are they thinking? We started walking again, and I looked down to find him creeping up on a campfire out in the woods. The crunching was done, and I realized that had been for the benefit of the video. He could be damn near silent when he wanted to be, and as he snuck up on the campers, I let my fingers rest on the keyboard. There were two, both sitting around a healthy-looking fire, and both cooking hot dogs. They were laughing, listening to music, and he hovered on the edge of their campsite and watched them. They were being too loud to hear him. He could have probably started running, and he moved back some before moving the camera up to his face. Sorry, forest friends, but I need to call tonight's walk a little early. I need to have a word with some less than courteous forest friends and let them know that this isn't the burning season. Till next time, take care of yourselves and be safe. He ended the video there and hadn't answered any of the comments on it. People wanted to know what had happened and if he had scared them off. They wanted to know if he had called the police or the park rangers to enforce the burn ban. Some of them jokingly asked if he had just killed them and put their fire out, but these were mostly treated as jokes. Wildman, despite his name, was pretty peaceful and generally didn't interact with people any more than he had to. It was weird to think of him hunting folks, almost unheard of, and most people either laughed these comments off or told them it wasn't something to joke about. I could understand where they were coming from, and I didn't think some of them were joking. The tone of the video had shifted pretty quickly, and it had been a huge tonal shift at that. I finished up my stuff, listening to something different to fill the void, and when I packed up to go home, the video was still on my mind. I kept an eye on the channel for the next couple of days, watching for updates and watching what came out. Wildman stored some food in those pots, salted meat, it looked like, and buried them near the camp. The Wildman made a stew from some of the meat and some forest greenery. It rained, and the Wildman sat on a poncho and listened to it as it washed over him. Wildman showed us a little female raccoon that had come to visit Scamper, and he reflected that the little raccoon might return to nature soon. There were a few others, but someone in the comments asked where he had gotten the new poncho, and that caught my eye. Wildman responded that he'd had it for a while, but this was the first time he'd used it. Someone else asked if Maybe he had taken it from the campers he'd scared off the other day, but he didn't respond to that. That got me thinking, though, and I went back to the video to see if they were right. It was a little hard to tell, but the jacket did look a lot like the windbreaker that one of the campers was wearing. Had they left it behind when he scared him off? I didn't see how, since the guy was wearing it with the hood up the last time I'd seen him, and that made me think about that shoe again. Something wasn't adding up, and it was a mystery that I was interested in getting to the bottom of. Wildman had been on TikTok for a year, but he'd been on YouTube for about 5 years. He'd started out doing those videos that you sometimes see on those channels from South America, the ones where they made ponds and pools and things by hand. He had a couple of videos of him digging latrines and water reservoirs, building fire pits or lean-tos, and even one where he tried to build a log cabin, though it hadn't gone well and he had torn it apart. Something I was interested in, however, were the videos where he went walking in the woods at night. They seemed to be a running thing for him, and a lot of people said they liked the soothing forest sounds while they were trying to fall asleep. He had done about one a week since he started the channel, and I ran through the comments on a few of them and noticed someone was putting timestamps in some of them. The timestamps usually had comments asking why he had stamped these parts, but he never responded. The timestamps turned out to be exactly what I'd been looking for, though. The timestamps were always for parts of the video where he encountered people in the woods. Most of these encounters were very similar to the ones I had seen earlier. He would stalk the site, looking at the people, and generally wouldn't say a word as he watched them. Most of them were just people out hiking or vagrants in the woods, looking for a place to stay. But these videos were very different from his usual upbeat content. They felt very sinister, very off, and the more I watched them, the less I liked them. I went to the profile of the guy who kept leaving the timestamps, Forest Friend 66, and he had compiled some videos too, some videos about the wild man. His videos were usually compilations of the wild man and the videos where he stalked the campsites. Then he would circle something in a still frame and flash to a later video. A shirt from a hiker that had become an arm bandage. A necklace, seen for a flash of a second on a young woman, had made its way into a pile of things he was trying to sell at a pawn shop a few months after that. He showed the shoe that I had noticed and linked it back to the day hiker Wildman had seen on a daytime hike he had been on. And more chilling, sometimes the videos would end with a missing person poster from the Arkansas area. YouTube doesn't have a way to message people, but thankfully, he was on TikTok as well. I sent him a message asking if he believed the wild man might be hunting people, and a couple of hours later, I got a response. Yeah, I do. I've been compiling evidence for years of what he's doing, but the authorities don't take me seriously. They say that a lot of hikers go missing in Arkansas. The woods are not for the unskilled, and they don't believe that the wild man is real. I asked what he meant. Had they not seen his videos? Clearly he was real. He had close to 500,000 subscribers. Yeah, they think it's an act, a spoof, just something he's doing for views. They say there's no way that he could live in the woods like that without serious shelter. They claim he would have no way to survive the winters in just a tent. I showed them the videos of him doing just that, but they're convinced it's an act. I asked what he was going to do about it, and he said he meant to get proof. I'm going up there to find him. I have his general area pretty well figured out. Google Earth and the locations of the missing hikers have helped me pinpoint the area he's in, and I'm going to get some proof of what he's doing. I'll wait till he's doing a stream, I'll go with my camera, and I'll wait till he leaves the camp and do some searching. Hopefully, I can get some footage of the bones or clothes or something, and the police will have to believe me. I'll do it live so I have proof even if he catches me. Keep an eye on my channel. I'll be heading up there very soon. I told him I would, and a few weeks later, I got a notification that he was going live. I'd gotten a similar notification half an hour earlier that the wild man was going live too. He had announced that he was going hunting for some late-season deer, hoping to stock up for winter, and set out with his bow and his axe to find a couple of likely targets. Wildman headed off into the woods, whistling as he went with the raccoon pup following behind him. On Forest Friend 66's channel, I could see that he was watching Wildman leave the camp, getting as low as he could so the forest dweller wouldn't notice him. He waited for about 10 minutes, listening for the crunch of the hide moccasins, before he headed into the camp. The camp looked much the way it had in his videos, the large tent and the crackling fire and the little divot where he sometimes stored things so that he could tarp them. And Forest Friend 66 moved quickly among them, looking for signs of missing hikers. On his stream, Wildman was talking softly about tracking deer and looking for their signs. The tent contained nothing but a sleeping bag and a few assorted tools. Forest Friend 66 was careful to put everything back as he had found it, but the mess was so complete that it seemed almost needless. He went to the fire, but there was nothing there but old wood and old food remnants. He looked into the divot, but it was empty for now. He set about searching, looking for any hidden caches, but he didn't have a lot of luck. On the other stream, Wildman had found a likely tree and spotted a couple of deer grazing nearby. Forest Friend 66 was digging around randomly, trying to find something on the ground to prove his point. I remembered the pots and commented on his stream, of which I was the only watcher. He looked down, and I heard him mutter to himself as he tried to remember where those damn pots had been hidden. He dug around some, looking and hoping, and I turned back to the Wildman stream to see what he was doing. He was standing over the deer, an arrow sticking from it, as he lifted it and headed back to camp. I commented again, telling him that Wildman was returning, but he didn't see. I watched again later and saw that while he was looking, he had stuck his foot in a hole and broken through into a hidden cache of stuff. There were clothes, shoes, personal effects, and a fanny pack with cash and IDs in it. I would have thought Wildman would have no use for something like that, but it seemed he was not immune to keeping trophies of his kills. Forest Friend 66 grabbed the bag, preparing to run, when he heard a noise and looked up just in time to see Wildman coming back with the deer. On Wildman's stream, he saw Forest Friend, and the two just stood for a moment and looked at each other. "Hello there, Forest Friend," Wildman intoned, the deer slipping off his shoulder. "Why don't you have a seat by the fire and tell me—" But Forest Friend was already running. Wildman dropped his phone in the dirt, his stream becoming dark, and I turned to Forest Friend so I could follow his progress. His escape became something akin to a Blair Witch sequence. He was running through the woods like a frightened deer, and I believed that he had become the prey. He had to have had the camera and some kind of chest rig, because I was definitely along for the ride. I was getting a little seasick, actually. He was running flat out, but in the peripheries you could see Wildman keeping pace with him. He was toying with him, herding him, keeping him moving towards something. Forest Friend was panting, running and out of breath, but the farther he went, the less I saw of the shadow that he had angered. He seemed to be coming out of the woods, maybe to a road or a clearing, when something rose up in front of him and wrapped a meaty hand around the camera. I don't know if he broke it or simply turned it off, but I heard somebody say, "Hey there, Forest Friend," just before the feed cut off, and the tone was decidedly menacing. I saved a copy of the stream as quick as I could, not sure if Wildman would delete it or not, and I called the police in the area around where he lived. I told them what had happened, and I sent them a link to the stream and a copy of the video. But they didn't seem too worried. They said people went missing in the woods all the time, and it didn't necessarily mean any foul play had occurred. As for the video, well, it was a good bit of acting, but they didn't believe it. The guy in the video is a nut. He sends us evidence all the time, and it never pans out more than theories. As for the Wildman, that's Thomas Land. He lives in town. The character he pretends to be is just that, a character. If he wants to put on buckskins and play Tarzan, then that's his call. He owns all that land out there after all, so it's his to hunt and fish if he feels like it. They hung up on me, and it wasn't the last thing I heard on the matter. It's been a few hours since the stream, and I just got a message from Forest Friend 66. Well, no, I got a message from Thomas Land, aka Wild Man, on Forest Friend's account. Hello there, Forest Friend. I understand you've been talking to some not-so-friendly people. He's not going to be a problem anymore, but I do need you to be a pal and delete that video you have. Otherwise, I might have to pay you a visit next, friend. I've been sedentary for a while, but a trip might be just what I need to spice things up. I stood in the grow house and looked skeptically at the bed of strange white mushrooms that Tobias was so excited about. Tobias, you can't be serious. Tobias looked down at the bed, his face falling a little as his excitement drained. What? Don't you think they're interesting? The mushrooms were a little bit interesting. They looked like the white mushrooms my mom would often mix in with her spaghetti when I was a kid. The difference between these mushrooms and the one that she bought from Walmart was that those didn't usually have caps that looked like skulls. Each of the 8 mushrooms, the fungi about the size of a croquet ball, had the perfect impression of a skull on them. Each one looked like one of those sugar skulls you sometimes saw at celebrations in Mexico, and each one was moving ever so slightly as we watched them. Oh, they're something, I told him, but I just don't think the crowds are going to pack in for your weird mushrooms. Well, they're also highly poisonous, he said, making me pull my finger back as I reached down to poke one. They could kill a person in a matter of hours, eat right through their stomach. Pretty neat, huh? Yeah, Tobias, but we need something with drawing power. It's snowing its guts out right now, I said, indicating the park outside the grow house. We need a pine forest, or some kind of fir tree with a face on it, or, I don't know, something that's going to pique people's interest. Well, Tobias said, throwing up his hands, this is the best I can do. I'm not as skilled at this as the lady is, despite my best efforts. I'm sorry, Samuel, but I'm no goddess. I started to flash at him, but I shook it off. This wasn't Tobias's fault. He was trying. We were all trying, but it just seemed hopeless. We couldn't run this place without her. However Professor Thurston had done it before I was turned, we couldn't make it work. Thurston had barely been making it work, it would seem, and the sensational new exhibits put forth by the lady were keeping us going by sheer excitement. Without her, we were lost on so many levels that the basement was all we had left these days. I'm sorry, Tobias. You're doing your best. I just want the lady to have somewhere to come back to, and keeping this place afloat is proving harder than it should be. We need money coming in to keep the lights on, or we may go dark here pretty shortly. I was probably being a bit dramatic, but the truth was that we were about 3 months away from being broke. We had made a lot of money while the park was open. Our last few events had been very good for tourism in Kashmir, but it takes money to run a park, even when you aren't paying your staff. Food costs, power bills, resurfacing the parking lot, defenses for the coming winter, and brandy low do drink when they make merry. We'd spent a little too freely, it would seem, and now the clock was ticking. He put a hand on my shoulder, and I was glad for the support. We've all been on edge lately, Sam. It happens when the lady's away. That was putting it lightly. I'd broken up 5 fights just the week before, and twice as many verbal altercations. The Brandy Low were as a rule a jolly bunch. We fought hard against those who opposed us, but the family that we had here was extremely tight-knit, and they generally stuck close together. This was our family. We were all we had now, that we were part of this world, and it made us very protective of each other. Lately, however, the ones who had stayed were all possessed of an extremely short fuse. These were Brandylow, who had been especially friendly, best friends even, and some of them joined the disappearances afterwards. That was always the hardest part. I would wake up and there were just less of us. There had never been a lot of Brandylow, less than 100 at any given time, but these disappearances were stretching us even thinner than usual. We were down to 30 Brandylow, over half of them having vanished, and if the Green Man decided to swoop in and finish the job, there wouldn't be anything we could do about it. I'm gonna go check the mail, see if there's any letters from Uncle Travelin' Matt, I said. Tobias scrunched his eyes up in the same way he had the last few times I had made that joke. I still don't really get it. It's a character from I spent a few seconds deciding whether I wanted to try to explain Fraggle Rock to a creature that had been around since alchemy was widely accepted, and decided against it. A TV program I used to watch when I was a kid. Let me see if he sent me something, and I'll let you know what it says. I headed out into the park, walking past a few apathetic Brandylow. They should be tending exhibits, on guard detail, or arranging new things for our guests to see, but they just listed around like lost ships. I felt a little like a lost vessel myself these days, cast adrift and unable to find a purpose. I knew what I should be doing and what my purpose was, but I couldn't make any of it make sense. What was I doing? Just going through the motions, protecting a place that no one wanted, maintaining something that might be gone by spring. My feet headed for the front gate, as steadfast as ever, and as I walked past the guard booth, I heard the soft refrains of a snorer. Looking in, I wasn't surprised to see Bobby Lee asleep. Bobby Lee was pretty lazy as a rule, and I hadn't wanted him on my security detail. I also hadn't had much of a choice. Like I said, numbers were down, and the decent ones had been the first to go. What we were left with were the lazy ones, the scatterbrained ones, the unreliable Brandylow that would run if it came to a fight. I kicked the side of the booth, and Bobby Lee came awake with a snort. You'll be the Green Man's best friend if he comes along. You'll sleep through the battle, too, I suppose. I was just resting my eyes, Bobby Lee complained. Well, by all means, don't let me keep you from your nap, then, I said, trying to keep the bite out of my voice and failing. Bobby Lee grumbled as I walked off, but I was pretty sure he was asleep before I got to the mailbox. My hooves crunched in the snow as I walked across the empty parking lot. It was really coming down out here, and it hadn't let up in the past week. It was piling up, despite the city and their snowplows, and I wouldn't have been surprised if the box was empty. It wasn't, though, and I opened it to find 3 pieces of mail: a power bill, a catalog for farming equipment, and a letter from my old pal Travelin' Randy. This one was postmarked from northern Mississippi, quite a jaunt from the last time he had written. I carried the mail back to the park, unsurprised to find Bobby Lee asleep again, and slid my nail across the seal to break it. The letter inside was not particularly long, but Randy wasn't a long-winded man. He was prone to short letters that got to the point very quickly. Randy wrote well, but I do wish that he had spent a little more time on details and backgrounds. None of us had any idea where he was, and most of the time neither did he. The letter was less than a page long, and it didn't look like it held anything about finding the lady, but I wanted to read it anyway. Dear Sam, greetings from the great state of Mississippi. It's cold here, but I believe it might be colder where you are. There's snow on the ground, but that's okay. I've never minded sleeping rough. If the cold bothers the barker, he doesn't show it, but the Gordling doesn't seem to like it much. I've taken to carrying him. Poor little thing shakes like a leaf. He's been leading us towards Arkansas for the last couple of days. To where, I don't know, but he's been heading there unerringly. We had a close call the other night, and still makes me afraid to travel at night. We were traveling when that whistling suddenly came back. I didn't recognize it at first, but the barker told us we needed to get up high. He said the whistler would probably miss us if we got up high, so we all climbed up, me carrying that little pumpkin somehow, and spent the night up a tree. I couldn't really see him, it was pretty dark down there, but I could hear him. He came crunching through the brush, whistling that terrible tune, and we stayed up in the branches till morning. He doesn't seem to care much for the sun, and he left off whistling as he went, as the sun peeked over the horizon. We're back on the road again, and I'll drop this letter off when we come to the next town. I hope things are well at the park, and I hope all of you are safe. Randy. I folded the letter up and headed back to the shop to wake up Bobby Lee. I told him to go make himself useful somewhere else and took his watch for a while. Sometimes, a good long turn at watch is just what you need to have a good think. If he was heading for Arkansas, then maybe the Green Man was in one of those mountain ranges in the area. Arkansas was pretty rural and pretty big, too. It wouldn't be outside the realm of possibility to find him there. I hoped so. I also hoped that Randy wouldn't run afoul of the Green Man's minions and just disappear one day. The fact that he had one in his company already was something I tried not to dwell on. Tobias came out as the sun started setting, and after reading over the letter, he came to the same conclusion. There was a time when she was missing that we searched around a big range in that area. There was a tug, a spark, that we couldn't ignore, but then it moved suddenly, and we lost it for about a decade. The next tug we got was when we found her in the park. He's keeping us from locating her somehow, but it appears he may not be able to stop the Gordling. He went back to the grow house, having had another idea, and as I sat here and watched the snow come down, I wondered how many more ideas this place had in it before we closed the gates forever. I know what this sounds like, boss, but he's on the level. Mr. Seraph tried not to roll his eyes. I should hope so. I was just leaving to meet with a real talent. A gift for tongues is so very rare these days, and so highly sought after. Joseph Ramon claimed to not just easily comprehend languages, but also be able to speak them too. Mr. Seraph had a dozen prospective buyers already on the books, and he was hoping that Ramon had a great deal of talent. After the fiasco with Cassandra, Mr. Seraph was taking no chances. He had managed to turn it to his advantage, but it had lost him quite a bit of money. Now, Lucifer was trying to sell him on some new client who had come in to sell his power. Mr. Seraph was highly suspicious, but he would still assess the talent. So what is this talent, young man? Invisibility, Lucifer said, wiggling his hands in a vaguely mystical way. Invisibility, Mr. Seraph said, sounding dubious. Oh yeah, and it's a genuine talent. And how can you be so sure? Mr. Seraph asked, opening the door to his office and looking in on an empty room. Probably because I've been sitting here for close to 30 minutes and no one has come to take any notice of me, said a voice from nowhere. Mr. Seraph lifted an eyebrow and looked around. Lucifer, I knew you were a man of many talents, but I didn't think that throwing your voice was included in that list. Lucifer laughed as well, his mirth skittering around the rafters. I am a man of many interests, but that's not one of them, boss. Is this how you treat your clients, or just the invisible ones? Said the voice again. 'Cause if it's the latter, then I'm not sure if I need to report this to someone as discrimination. Mr. Seraph cast a sidelong look at Lucifer Jones and moved around the room to take a seat at his desk. As he passed the empty chair seated before it, he couldn't help but cast a wary eye. If this was a joke, Mr. Seraph didn't get it, and he steepled his fingers before his eyes and stared at the seat. "Very well, then, Mr. Cavlis, Richard Cavlis. And how long have you been, invisible, Mr. Cavlis?" The empty spot chuckled. "Well, it didn't really happen overnight. It's a long story, if you want to hear it." Mr. Seraph shrugged. "I suppose I have time. I will admit I've never met anyone with a talent quite like yours." The chair creaked a little, signaling a change in position, and Mr. Cavlis started in on his tale. "I was a quiet kid, though I wasn't always, I guess. When I was a toddler, I was a holy terror. I ran everywhere. I was constantly yelling. I was obnoxious and a bit spoiled, and my parents were utterly at a loss about what to do with me. They were both very mild-mannered people, very quiet, very reposed, and finally they took me aside and gave me a list of hard facts. They told me that I was starting school next year and that no one was going to like me if I behaved like this. They wanted me to be like them, quiet and speculative, or just not quite so loud. So they told me that if I wanted friends, that I needed to be quieter. They knew how to get to me, because I desperately wanted to have friends. They were right, sort of. Other kids were kind of put off by how loud I was, and I was smart enough to see that they didn't like how wild I was, so I decided to try it out. I was quiet, I was a little soberer, and it worked. People mistook it for maturity or pragmatism, and people thought I was mysterious. I liked it, so I leaned into it. I was always reading and learning and looking like an anime protagonist more than anything, but it kind of had the opposite effect. People stopped noticing me, stopped paying attention to my pragmatism, and I leaned into it even more. I studied, I learned, I aced my tests, and I was a delight to my teachers. My lack of notice wasn't just for the other kids, though. My teachers always told my parents I was a good student, very smart, very advanced, but they couldn't really tell them much else. As time went on, people took even less notice, and I was basically a ghost. I didn't draw attention to myself. I didn't speak unless I was called on, and by high school, I was hardly ever called on. That was fine with me. I liked being on my own, but when my parents stopped taking notice of me, I realized I had a problem. I stopped being able to get the attention of anyone. Cashiers at stores, cars when I would cross the road, other students at college when I would come to take tests. Anyone. I had to enroll for college online. I had to work remotely. I had to conduct all interviews over the phone, and I had to basically conduct all my business remotely or be ignored. I could talk to people on the phone. They could hear me then, but in person, I might as well have been the wind. I'm not actually invisible. Not as far as I know, but people often hear my voice and think it's something on the wind or something, or a ghost, I guess. It's a lot of fun sometimes, but it can also be pretty lonely. I'm ashamed to say that I usually just take things that I need. I use ATMs and leave money behind, but I usually have to guess how much it is, and I'm sure it plays hell with their inventory. A man has to eat, though, and I've gotten pretty good at cooking. I rent an apartment on a monthly basis, and I usually have to talk to my landlord on the phone pretty regularly, so he doesn't accidentally rent out my unit to somebody. I was content with this strange turn of events until recently. Recently, however, I met someone. Mr. Seraph leaned in. That's usually how it works. So many people who want to sell their talent do so because of someone they love. Cavlis laughed. I guess I'm not unique in that respect, then. Her name's Rebecca. She lives in the unit next to mine. She often comes out on the fire escape to smoke, and I surprised her one night when I came out to catch some air. She thinks I'm a ghost or something. She comes out almost every night to talk to me. The chair creaked again, and Mr. Seraph was surprised to see it rock back on its legs. He could almost see him leaning there. Almost, but it was in that vague way that you sometimes think you see smoke or dust. Sir, when I tell you that I am smitten, I mean it. She says all the time that she wishes I was real, that she could see me, and I wish she could too. I have no idea how to make myself more substantial, but I've read several stories that you are the man to come to when you need to lose a talent. I need to sell you this gift, Mr. Seraph. Hell, I'll give it to you if it means that I can be with the woman that I love. Please help me. Mr. Seraph nodded, bringing the book out from his desk. Just sign your name and leave the rest to me. Mr. Cavlis didn't hesitate. He took up the pen and signed his name, and Mr. Seraph was already counting the money. This was a rare thing indeed. He had never had a talent like this. The sky was the limit on who would want such a talent. Journalists, contract killers, government agents, jewel thieves, they would all clamor for the ability to move unseen. Mr. Seraph would make a killing at this. It would be the most lucrative deal yet. He would... What's going on? Cavlis asked. And Mr. Seraph looked down and felt his dreams melt like fresh snow. The ink was going back into the pen. The signature wouldn't write. The paper wouldn't fill. Mr. Seraph's dreams lay in tatters. He had seen this before. It didn't happen often, but when it did, there was nothing to be done. Some talents could not be taken, and this appeared to be one of them. He reached out and took the pen, the silver thing floating in the air a little over the chair before it disappeared back into the holder. It appears that what you have there isn't a talent, Mr. Seraph said. What the hell is it? The invisible man asked. I don't know, Mr. Seraph said as he scribbled something on a piece of paper. But I know who might be able to help you. Go to this address and tell her you wish to speak with her on this matter. Sometimes she can take things away that I cannot. She may be able to help you where I also cannot. The paper floated in the air as Mr. Cavlis read it out, and Mr. Seraph could only guess at his expression. And she can help me. I believe so. She's good at solving problems that I can't. At least, she used to be. The chair creaked, and as the door opened and closed, Mr. Seraph got up and told Lucifer to mind the shop. I have people with actual talents to visit, and fresh clients to reach out to. Righto, Lucifer said. Sorry to waste your time, boss. Mr. Seraph shook his head. You didn't know. Hell, I didn't know until we had him sign the damn contract. In the future, though, I guess we'll have to temper our expectations. Lucifer nodded. Sir, where did you send him? I didn't know you knew anyone else. Well, like you. Mr. Seraph nodded. Oh, yes, several. I sent him to someone I believe might have the answer to his problem. Because if I can't take his talent, then maybe she can make him forget it exists. I believe now that I have made it to adulthood that I was given a key too soon. I was in the 3rd grade when my dad got a job at Maser Fiber Optics. He would be working from 2 till 11, making more money than he had ever made before, but there was a catch. Dad had always worked from 6 to 2, which meant that he would be home before 3 so that he could get me off the bus. Mom had a typical 9 to 5, something she couldn't change, and that left 2 hours where I would be unattended. 2 hours didn't seem that long, though, and the money was so much better than what he had made at the phone company that he decided to give me some trust. I wasn't a kid who lacked responsibility, and I didn't usually have trouble following rules, so they decided I was old enough to be trusted to let myself in and lock the door behind me. Just let yourself in, make a snack, do your homework, don't answer the phone or the door if someone comes around. Can you do that? I nodded, thinking it sounded exciting, and so I became a latchkey kid. It went pretty well for a while. I'd come home, make some Nesquik and bagel bites, do my homework, go watch cartoons until Mom came home and started dinner. It was a good system until I came home to find something was different. I came home from school, worrying about my math homework, when I found that the front door was unlocked. I put my key in, meaning to turn it so I could get inside, but the door just pushed open as it creaked into the quiet house. I felt a little chill run through me. The door was never unlocked. My parents were notorious about locking it, always had been, and as I looked into the seemingly empty house, I felt sure that I didn't want to go in there. Go inside, make a snack, do your homework, watch some TV till I get home. That was my mom's voice echoing in my head, and it moved me past the wall of fear that was building in me. I went inside, closed the door, locked the door, and went to the kitchen for my snack. I'd lived in my house my whole life, and in that time, I'd never felt unsafe there. It was my house. You're supposed to feel safe in your house, but as I walked through the living room and towards the kitchen, I felt the hairs on the back of my neck stand up. It was that feeling I felt sometimes when I got up to use the bathroom in the middle of the night. The feeling of monsters watching me. But it was the first time I'd felt it in the daytime. Something was watching me. Something unfriendly. And as I moved into the kitchen, I saw something move out of the corner of my eye. It was gone when I looked, but I was pretty sure it had been there. I shrugged it off at the time, though, and went to get my chocolate milk and chips. I was scared, but I was also 8. When you're 8, it isn't uncommon to jump at shadows or think there might be ghosts or something. You know it can't be real, but that doesn't stop it from making you scared. I took the powder out of the cabinet, took the milk out of the fridge, and spooned it into my glass as I prepared to mix it. I had the milk up, ready to pour, when I saw something reflected in the side of the glass. It wasn't exactly the reflection of a person, but as the milk slowly sloshed into the cup, I saw something lumpy and ill-defined peek at me from the door of the kitchen. I couldn't tell what it was, and when the milk spilled over the rim and onto the countertop, I almost dropped the jug. I couldn't tell what it was, and when the milk spilled over the rim and onto the countertop, I almost dropped the jug. I managed to get the paper towels before the milk spilled onto the floor, but when I peeked at the door, no one was there. I put my chips in a bowl and got my homework out of my backpack as I went to set at the dining room table. Unlike usual, I sat with my back to the door to the backyard. If there was something here, something I was becoming pretty sure there was, I wanted to be able to run if the time came. As I bent over my work, I kept seeing something peek around the edge of the kitchen door. It was always gone when I looked up, but not quite. It was like catching a kid peeking around a corner who pulled his head in just a little too slowly, and I almost imagined that I could hear whoever it was giggling when I almost saw them. My teeth were chattering, and I'll never know how I stopped myself from crying, but somehow I kept my cool as I worked through my math homework. It was the most scared I had ever been in my entire life, even more than the time I had snuck into the living room to watch scary movies. and I was having trouble finishing my math. Who could focus on fractions when something was in your house, watching you? I was just scribbling now, barely paying attention to what I was writing. I was more interested in trying to see this thing that was stalking me. I couldn't catch more than a glimpse, but it was bald and looked fat. It had no neck. Its head and shoulders were simply smooth mounds of fat, but it was the eyes and the mouth that scared me the most. Its eyes were little more than dark, piggy circles. There was no white to them. They looked like doll's eyes as they stared at me. And the mouth was drawn up in a grin. The lips were wet. The teeth were shiny, like the thing kept running its tongue over them constantly. The eyes, despite having no real color other than black, looked hungry, and the mouth was like that of a wolf in one of the cartoons. He was another big bad wolf just looking for a pig to gobble up, and I was the one he had found at home. I might not know what these fractions meant, but I had figured out one thing. I had figured out that I had to get out of here. Whatever it wasn't a monster or a boogeyman. That thing was human, and the longer I sat there, the more I could smell it. It was giving off a smell like my Uncle Tom did at Christmas sometimes. It smelled sweet and sour and a lot like old sweat. Something I would later learn was skin expelling liquor. As a kid, I just knew it smelled bad, and I wanted to get away from it before it decided to gobble me up. I thought and thought, trying to find some reason why I would need to go outside. Then I saw the trash. It was full, the empty biscuit can sitting on top like an old snakeskin. That's when I got an idea. The garbage was one of my chores, as long as there wasn't any glass in it, so after cleaning up my homework, I went to the can and started taking the bag out so I could take it outside. I headed for the back door, knowing it was watching me, and when I opened the back door, I heard it, heavy footsteps running after me. I slammed the door and dropped the bag, running for the fence that separated the front and backyard. I heard it hit the door, heard it trip over the bag, and I heard it fall onto the back porch, but I was already around the house and heading for the neighbor's house. If it had been any other day, I would have kept running, looking for someone who was home, but I saw the Staub's car in the driveway and knew that they were home. I heard the gate open and close, but I was already hammering on my neighbor's door. I heard someone drop something in the kitchen, heard Mrs. Staub come hurrying to the door, and out of the corner of my eye, I could see the thing coming around my house and towards the neighbor's house. I pounded even harder, wrenching at the knob, and when Mrs. Staub opened the door, I shot inside and yelled for her to close it because something was after me. She looked up, and she must have seen something, because she slammed and locked the door. Then she called the police, and after that, she called my mom. The police beat my mom home, but only just. I told Mom what I'd seen, told her something had been stalking me in the house, and how the door had been unlocked when I got home. She reassured me that it was fine, that it was probably nothing. She said it was probably just my mind playing tricks on me, but Mrs. Staub told her that nothing had been playing tricks on my mind, and she had seen it too. It was a fat, naked man who tried to come right up on my porch, and I'll testify to that before the throne of God. Mom was very confused, and what the police discovered didn't help matters much. They found a large man, one with very little neck, hiding in my closet, as if he expected me to come back after he had chased me out of the house. They didn't find any ID on him for obvious reasons, but they found his clothes folded neatly in the backyard underneath my mother's rose bushes. Mom told me later that he had a record of doing stuff with kids, but that this was the first time he had escalated into something like this. I'm thankful that they got him before he could actually hurt a child, but he was responsible for the scariest day of my life. After that, my mom asked my aunt to come and meet me at the house when I got off the bus and to sit with me until she got home. That kept on until I was in middle school, and Mom decided I could probably look after myself again. I still think about that day a lot, and it's probably why I kept my kids in after-school care for as long as I did. Grandpa coughed into his hand before taking a large drink of the hot cider we'd been sipping on. It was cold on the porch, but if it bothered Glimmer, she never commented on it. The snow was coming down out in the yard around Grandpa's modest home, but we were bundled up under the overhang, Grandpa looking like a small bear with all his furs and blankets. I didn't much care for that cough. It was a cough I'd been hearing more and more of since the peace talks at the garden. We had all gotten cold. Some of us had even gotten wet, and Grandpa had been coughing ever since. I was wheedling him into taking breathing treatments, but he didn't take them as often as he should. John was sitting with us as well, looking like Kenny from South Park as he peeked from the mouth of his enormous North Face jacket. He had opted for one of the deck chairs that we had, Grandpa taking an old recliner that he had dragged up from somewhere. It was probably covered in mold and God knew what else, and Glimmer and I were in pub chairs that looked old enough to order a drink and not get carded. Glimmer was talking about her last hunt, a bear that had decided to raid their food stores instead of hibernate, and the ensuing battle with her and the hunters that had been involved in it was truly epic.
We had tracked him back to his cave, you see, and when we found him, he was very upset. He roared and cheered at us, his big paws sending up snow as it hit the ground instead of the hunter that had been there a moment before. We put arrows into him, but it only seemed to make him angrier. Agrino, one of my old friends, put a spear in him, but the bird turned and swept him to the ground, falling on him with tooth and claw. I jumped onto his back.
As she told this part, she got up and showed us a mighty leap before coming down on an imaginary bear.
And stabbed it with my knife. The other hunters were on him then too. Clubs and knives and spurs went to work, but this was a total bear. He came snarling off of Agrino and charged at me, but as he passed, I ripped Agrino's spear from his side and it opened him up. He roared and tried to attack us again, but it was harder now that his guts were hanging out. Once we were sure he was dead, we dragged him back to the camp and took his meat for our own.
We all clapped at the end of the story, Glimmer smiling triumphantly as she took a seat beside me again. "How big was the bear?" Grandpa asked, putting a mittened hand over his mouth as he coughed, hawked, and spit.
15 stones,
Glimmer said proudly. "And how much is that for us normal folks?" John said with a laugh. Glimmer screwed up her face, thinking.
You would say he was. 300 pounds.
"A monster, to be sure," Grandpa said. But he stopped talking and looked out at the woods, at the soft but angry sound of snow falling from trees as the treetops swayed. I glanced out as well, hearing the patter of fresh snow as it came down from the heights, and Glimmer shuddered beside me.
It is odd to hear the three cousins moving around so early in the season.
"The what?" I asked, raising an eyebrow at her.
The three cousins. We do not bother them. They can be quite formidable if noticed.
"We call them the hide-behind," Grandpa said, and I saw John do a little shudder of his own. "Haven't thought of those in years." "So this is something you've heard of?" I asked. It's not often that my creature knowledge is rivaled by my student. "Yeah, well, this is one that my grandpa told me about. He was a logger when I was younger, working in the Appalachian range, when something tried to pull him out of a tree. He was working in the late afternoon, trying to drop one more tree before knocking off, when he claims that he was grabbed and something tried to rip him out of the boughs of a tree that was almost 20 feet in the air. He would have been snatched as well, but he was wearing a harness and was thankfully attached to the tree so that whatever it was couldn't get him. When it couldn't immediately detach him, it stopped after a few yanks, and he said he heard loud footsteps retreating into the forest." "Did he get a good look at it?" Grandpa asked. "Nah, he didn't see it at all, but When he talked to his coworkers about it, they said it sounded like a hide-behind. One of his coworkers, as he described it, was from the reservation and knew some of the old legends. He told my grandpa that he was very lucky, and most people didn't come away from an encounter with the hide-behind. He wasn't wrong. Not a lot of people come away from an encounter with the hide-behind and walk away at all. I encountered one too when I was younger. Did I ever tell you about that? I shook my head. You sure didn't. Grandpa chuckled, but this led to another cough, hack, and spit. I tried to ignore the slight reddish tint on the snow beside the porch as he began. It was nothing, a drop or two tops. He had coughed his throat a little raw, that was all. Nothing to worry about. Nothing to fret about. It was 1979, and your mother was about 4 years old at the time. I was still running the roads, still delivering loads here and there and everywhere, and your grandmother was having a time keeping your mother in check, especially since your uncle was about 2. I was spending a little more time at home, not traveling more than a few 100 miles from home at a time, but there were things to keep me busy close to home, too. The woods around these hollers and hills aren't quite as large as you might think. People here have long memories, and they remembered my grandmother. They also remembered that she had done them a service, and they remembered a little crumb chaser who they'd seen with her, asking questions and learning things most people had forgotten. They came to me now and then when barns needed to be blessed against famine and plague. They came to me when they needed their children's bruises or spots inspected for devil's marks or witches' signs. They came to me especially when they needed spirits removed from their houses. In that fall of 1979, I removed 5 spirits from 5 different homes, and when I got a call about lunchtime, I expected this would be number 6. The phone was something new. We hadn't had it for more than 5 years, but it made our little world feel even smaller. I remember the day like it was yesterday. Your mother was balancing on your grandmother's hip. Even at 4, she loved to be held, and your uncle was sitting in his crib and crying for food. I was sitting in the den, reading something or another, when your grandmother called me and said someone wanted to speak with me urgently. "It's the Widow Trask," she said. "It's important." I nodded, putting down my book and going to the phone. It was indeed the Widow Trask, and she had a boogin in her attic. It had been knocking around up there for 5 days, and she was hoping I could come and take a look. I told her I would, and packed a few sandwiches and wax paper along with a pickle, and kissed my wife on the cheek. "I've got to head out. The widow has a job for me." She nodded, telling me to be safe, and I said I'd likely see her at dinner. I grabbed my exorcism bag on the way out the door and headed off to the widow's house. The Widow Trask lived about 2 hollers up the road from us, about 2 miles as the dirt road rolls, and while that might seem a long way to you, it was a quick leg stretch for me back then. I liked to walk. I liked it a lot more than driving most times, and it was a good day for it. It was a lovely autumn day, and the birds were singing, and the trees were gently playing in the breeze. It wasn't a long walk, but despite the day, I still had an odd feeling like something was watching me. I chalked it up to nerves. Tensions were often high when you might have to go toe-to-toe with a bad spirit, but this felt a little different than even that. I tried not to make it obvious, not looking around or making a run for it, and after a mile, I didn't feel like I was being watched anymore. I got to the widow's house about 1, and she was happy to see me. I don't know what it is, she told me, but it sounds nasty and it's making a lot of racket up there. I told her to leave it to me, and I went up the ladder and into the dark recesses of the attic. I could hear something up there, something moving in the shadows. She was right. This thing sounded big, and it sounded angry. I took out my cross from under my shirt and laid it on my chest, reached into my bag for holy water as I crept forward towards an armoire that was shaking slightly. I was beseeching the Lord to aid me, telling the spirit it had no place here and to vamoose. And the closer I got, the more that old dresser shook. I could see one of the doors shaking, just waiting to pop open and give me a start, and I decided to beat it to the punch. I reached for the door, spat out all the Latin I knew, and tossed a hefty stream of holy water into the armoire. The raccoon I doused was as surprised as I was, and it chittered as it fell back and put its little paws on its face. Whatever was in that holy water, it didn't like having it in its eyes much, and I had a small window to react while it was surprised. I grabbed an old onion sack that was sitting half full of clothes and popped it over the top of him, drawing the neck shut before he could bust out and bite the holy hell out of me. I came downstairs panting, holding up the bag and telling the widow that her attic was clean. "You caught a spit and an onion sack?" she asked, mystified. "No, ma'am. I caught a raccoon, though. Looks like he was getting up to mischief in there." I set the sack on the back porch and went back up to the attic to look for roof damage. Sure enough, there was a little hole in the eaves that the critter had used to wiggle in, and after a little bit with a hammer and nails, I'd patched it up. I looked for other holes in need of patching, but that appeared to be the only one. The widow offered to pay me, but Grandma had never taken money for her witchy work, and neither did I. Instead, the widow gave me 3 jars of canned peaches and 3 jars of vinegar salts. To the uninitiated, they're like a topping for food, kind of a gravy. They taste very good, but they stink to high heaven. I haven't had any in years. The process is mostly lost to time, but when I see an old lady at the market with one, you better believe I buy a few. So there I was, heading home with my cans in an old sack and my exorcism kit slung over my shoulder. The sun was at that golden point where you know it won't be light much longer, and as I walked, I felt pretty good. I'd fixed the widow's problem, gotten rid of a raccoon without hurting it, and I had 2 jars of pepper salts and 3 of peaches that the wife would love. It had been a good day, and I had forgotten my earlier apprehension as I walked home. I soon remembered it, though, as the hairs on my neck prickled up, and I felt the urge to peek over my shoulder. Something was following me, and it wasn't being altogether quiet about it. I didn't turn around to try to find it, but I could see something if I looked from the corner of my eye. Whatever it was huge. It was tall, 13 or 14 feet, and it seemed to sense me peeking. It was trying to hide amongst the trees, this huge furry thing, but I could see it, and I realized the danger I was in. Grandma had told me about the hide behind, and I realized that this one must be young to venture so close to people. They usually hid in the deeper woods, staying out of sight and getting hikers and lumbermen, and this one had gone into human territory to hunt. It must have been a slim year for outdoorsmen, I guessed. I didn't run, that would only make it chase me, but I kept my pace and headed for home. It got closer as I went, and I was worried that I might not have enough time to get away if it lunged at me. The thing was twice as high as me, at least, and its arms looked enormous from what I'd seen. He could pluck me up like a puppy and have me down his throat before I could say boo. I was getting close to home, though, and I was pretty sure that he would lose interest in me if I just ignored him. I was nearly fatally wrong. It was about 10 minutes from the house when I felt something strong and thick grip the back of my shirt. Suddenly I was being lifted up, soaring amongst the trees, and I could just barely see the furry mouth opening to devour me whole. He was even bigger than I'd thought, closer to 15 or 16 feet, and he was intent on having me for supper. I started panicking, reaching for anything that could help me, and the first thing I found was the jars and the bag. I didn't have time to see which one I was grabbing, and I threw it into his mouth where it shattered against his gravel-gray teeth and sent him doubling over in pain. Turns out it was one of the jars of pepper salts, and the smell hit both of us like a bomb. It dropped me, and I landed on my back hard enough to bruise it up. If he'd knocked the wind out of me, I'd be dead. But I had enough wits about me to drop the sack and the bag of exorcism stuff and run for it. I could hear it gagging and coughing behind me as I ran, but it didn't seem too interested in chasing me. I ran until I got to my house and had the door closed behind me. Your grandma asked what the hell had happened, since I was out of breath and scared looking. I told her what I had seen, and she was nice enough to rub my back for me as I did it. I went back the next day, a new jar of pepper salts in hand, but it was all right where I'd left it. The peaches and the other jar of peppers were intact. My exorcism kit was unharmed. I never saw another one that close to the house again, and they stick in the woods now. I imagine the one that got away had a pretty interesting story to tell the others, and sometimes I spread fresh pepper salts around to ferment on the edge of the property. If they mean to make a meal of me, I say make 'em work for it. We all had a good laugh at the end, though I suppose it was a near miracle that Grandpa had made it out alive. "And you've never seen another one near the property?" I asked. "Nope, but I do find footprints now and again. The pepper salts aren't nearly as tasty as the widow's, but they do the trick just fine." We all listened to the sound of snow falling in the woods then, wondering if some hide-behind might not have heard Grandpa's story too, and might carry it and the secret of his successful lack of being digested back to their little group of man-eaters. My interest in making pepper salts had nothing to do with the story, of course, but I still pestered Gramps until he gave me the recipe. Better safe than scarfed, I suppose. Any ideas of tiredness or weariness fled from me at the sound of my mother's voice. I ran, kicking up corn stalks and dirt as I went. The people, the members of the Bright that had grabbed me, were getting their wits about them, and I wanted to be gone by the time they were on their feet. I ran like someone possessed, everything sliding by like one of those shots in an old movie that they have on a track. The houses came into view, still dark and imposing, but they slid by like props on a rail. Everyone in this little community must have been at the chapel, because no one came out to challenge me. No doors were kicked open to reveal angry villagers wielding torches and pitchforks. No cries were raised to get me, and the only noise was the sound of people yelling by the chapel behind me. So when someone stepped into my path, their hands clamping over my shoulders, I screeched like a heroine in a slasher movie. "What have you done?" he asked, shaking me as he asked it again and again, and I realized it was Brother Thomas. He looked crazed, his eyes appearing bruised, and the spit flew from his mouth as he shook me hard enough to make me worried that he might give me brain damage. He wasn't really giving me a chance to answer, so I did the only thing I could think to do, given the situation, and kicked him between the legs. The crazy seemed to leak right out of him, and he groaned as he crumpled into a heap on the road. As he fell away, I ran and kept running until I was past the general store and fleeing up the road back to town. I could hear people yelling behind me, hear them trying to give chase, but I suppose those Quaker clothes didn't run quite as quick as my jeans and sneakers. From the corner of my eye, I could see lamps and torches raised as they looked for me in the woods, and I prayed that I would make it back to town before they caught me. Back to town. I suddenly remembered that getting back to town wouldn't do anything. The people in the sewers had been pretty clear that the surface dwellers were in the pocket of the farm. If they caught me, they would just turn me in and take me right back to my mother. I thought about going back to the sewers, but what good would that do? No, I needed my truck, and I needed to get out of here. I needed to go back to my grandma and call the cops or the FBI or something, and get someone out here to check this out. This had to stop. It had already gone on for too long, and I didn't intend to let it keep going if I could help it. The town came up on the horizon, the lights dim in the evening gloom, and I figured it was my only real option. I could put my hood up, but maybe not be noticed until I got close. I checked my watch and saw that it was past 8, so I was hoping that the streets would be empty. As I took my first step in that direction, however, someone made a psst sound from a nearby bush. I turned hesitantly, preparing to run, but sighed in relief when I saw that it was Joseph. "Hey, are you okay?" "Yeah," I whispered, hunkering down as I tried to get on eye level with him. "What are you doing here?" "I was halfway back to the pipe when I heard a loud noise. I came running and almost ran into one of their patrols. They looked like they were after someone, and I figured that someone's you." I nodded. "Yeah, my meeting with my mom didn't go quite the way I'd planned. I need to get back to my truck and get out of here. I don't have to tell you what's going to happen if they catch me." He glanced behind him suddenly, and I could hear them getting closer. They were stomping through the trees, lanterns raised, or honest-to-God torches held in their hands, and Joseph pulled me into the bushes with him. We hunkered there, waiting for them to thin out before he pointed away from the woods and towards the town. "Come on, we need to talk to James." He went as quietly as he could, avoiding the lights that popped up from the tree line, and we made our way to the pipe that we had come out of. The usual night sounds were non-existent. The crickets and the night birds had been scared off by my pursuers, and both of us were constantly looking around to make sure that we weren't being followed. The last thing I wanted was for them to follow us back to our refuge, and as we came to the mouth of the pipe, I didn't see any of them around. Joseph boosted me up, and I lay flat and reached back so that I could help him up too. "So what happened to your guide?" he asked as we came out of the pipe and into the sewer. "He jumped into the bright," I said, not quite believing it myself. Joseph laughed. "So that's what that was." Margot had wondered if it might not be trying to get to them for that reason. "What?" I asked, "like to kill itself?" Joseph shrugged. "Our recon teams have told us about a bright light out in the woods sometimes, but no one has gotten close enough to the farm to see what it is. Given that the creature you took was almost completely dark, we had wondered if it might be, like a yin and yang thing. Maybe it's the darkness looking for the bright or something. We didn't know. We were mostly just guessing, but I guess it turned out to be something like that." "Glad I could be your little guinea pig for such an important experiment," I groused. "I mean, it was more of a happy accident than anything. We didn't send you to be a sacrificial lamb or something. Kinda thought he might be able to find the place, and he did, so I guess you're also welcome. I ignored that one as we made our way through the sewers. They were no less awful at night, the ground still best not looked at, and as we came into the refuge for the citizens of Tylerville, I saw John's eyes get wide at the sight of me. Clearly, Joseph wasn't the only one that had expected me not to come back, and he tossed his cigarette into the sludge as he came toward us. "You made it back," he said, clearly trying for a tone that said he had never doubted it. "And you seem to have lost our little friend. Did you find the place?" "Oh, I found it," I told him, putting my hands on my hips and scowling at him. "But your little friend turned out to be more than you guessed." "Maybe we better take this debriefing somewhere a little more private," John said, and the three of us headed to his dingy office, where I laid it all out for them. I told them about the farm, the Wonder Barn, the field, the church, and the miniature sun inside it. I told them how I had almost been grabbed by the people in the church, my mother included, and how I had only escaped because my guide had decided to throw himself at the ball of light they were worshiping. Joseph and John just sat there, eyes widening, faces changing, but saying nothing. John lit another cigarette as he listened, smoking it to the filter before stubbing it out and bouncing the end on the desk thoughtfully. "Well, damn, at least you made it out. That's the closest any of us have ever been to the Bright Farm. And came back. I mean, can't believe your own mother would treat you like that, but I think you're right. We have to get you out of town before they find you. They don't drive, so if you can get away from Tylerville, then you should be fine. And when I do get out of here, I can let someone know. I can tell the FBI or the..." But John was already shaking his head. "It's a good idea, but it won't work. We've tried to contact the authorities, even used my sheriff's department credentials, but it doesn't help. They get here, and the Bright people just tell them that it must have been a misunderstanding, and we can't exactly tell them that we're hiding in the sewers, since they might tell the townspeople. So they just leave again, or they get turned and they join the quilting circle. No, we'll just have to continue to fight. We'll take this town back, or we'll die trying, but that's not your problem. Your problem is getting out of here, and for that, you need wheels." He pulled a map out of his desk and tapped it. "Now, if you left your truck near the market, then it's been towed for a certainty. That means it's sitting at the police impound where they're waiting for you to stupidly go inquire about it so they can scoop you up and run you back to the farm." "Great. So, how do I get it then?" "You break into impound, clearly. Luckily for you, the impound lot is 2 lots away from the sheriff's office. This time of night, you can probably cut the lock and be in and out before anyone knows you're there. If there's some fracas at the farm, then the sheriff and his toadies will probably have gone to help them look for you too, so it's likely to be nothing but a skeleton crew over there right now. Sneak in, get the stuff, and drive out with your truck. Easy peasy." John let me borrow his bolt cutters, saying that if all else failed, then I could use it to get through the fence at the back of the impound lot. Looks like I'm going into Tylerville to do some breaking and entering, maybe get my truck back so I can get out of here. Joseph said he'll come with me so that I don't get lost, but that once I get to the lot, I'm on my own. Wish me luck, everyone, because I might be heading home tonight, or I might be heading right back to the farm. Either way, I guess my adventure will soon be over. It was something of an open secret in my family. A secret that could get you killed if you weren't prepared. In my family, there are always very specific rules about certain things. We cut our meat very small. We don't drink too fast. We don't go into water deeper than our waist. And we don't put our face in the water when we do. It's something you come to understand pretty quickly, or you don't live very long. I remember losing breath for the first time when I was 6, and it scared the hell out of me. It was a simple thing, but those are usually the things that trip us up. I had been out playing in the yard, the July heat beating down on me, and I was sweating profusely as I came pelting up to the hose pipe to the house. I should have gone inside to get a drink. Mom had told me that 1,000 times, but I was so thirsty. The water was cold and nice at first, running down my face as I took long drinks. I was guzzling before I knew it, drinking like a dog as my tongue stuck out. And that was when it happened. Suddenly I was coughing, gagging, but the more I coughed, the harder it became to breathe. It wasn't like I couldn't catch my breath. I felt like someone had their hands around my throat, and they were choking the life out of me. I was scared. A child of 6 isn't supposed to be scared like that. And as the little black spots started appearing in front of my eyes, I started to see something. It was like looking at a photo-negative person, an outline made real. It had long, spindly fingers, 3 times as long as a normal person's, and it had them wrapped around my neck as it throttled me. All I could do was look up at it, watching as it shook me slowly and firmly by the throat. I was blacking out, slowly dying in the clutches of this monster. But that's when I heard someone screaming from behind me, "Alegnarts, Alegnarts, Alegnarts." Just as quickly as it appeared, the creature was gone again. It had broken apart, like smoke on a breeze, and my mother was holding me as I lay in her arms. "I'm sorry," she said. "I'm so sorry. I told you to be careful. You always have to be careful. The Alegnarts is always waiting to get you." Back then, I didn't even think to ask her what the creature was. I was a child. Children believe in monsters. We don't question whether there are monsters or not. We question when they will come for us, or if we will be prepared. My mother had saved me, but she had also taught me how to save myself. I was lucky that day. Some members of our family are not so lucky when the Alegnarts comes for them. Despite the curse that followed us, I had a few siblings, 2 brothers and 2 sisters, neither of whom made it to adulthood. I had 2 older siblings, Sam and Gabrielle, and 2 younger siblings, Nikki and Matthew, a boy and a girl of each. I was what you would call a middle child, but I wouldn't be for long. Their deaths were too much for my father. He died before I finished high school, but my mother lived on. It was like she couldn't allow herself to die, knowing that she had to protect her children. Then, just her child, me. My sister was the first to go. She was older than me, 2 years older, and we often played together. I don't think she believed in this creature, but she had always been lucky. She didn't have a chance to see it, like I did. But when I was 8 and she was 10, she died very suddenly. I'm not sure if she believed then, but I believe that she saw the Alegnarts before she went. Mom was busy that day. My baby brother was less than a year old, and he needed a lot of care. My sister and I were home. My older brother was out with friends, and my younger sister was at our aunt's house with her daughter for a play date, and we were sitting around the house being bored. We were watching cartoons, lying on the couch, when we heard a sound that all children hope for. It was the gentle music of an ice cream truck. We both got excited, running to our rooms to see if we had any money, and we were out the door before our mother could even think to stop us. She was in the back, trying to get Matthew to sleep, and when the truck pulled up to the curb, we made our orders. Gabby got a bomb pop, and I got a Choco Crunch. I was eating slowly, taking my time as Mother had taught us to, but Gabby was excited. She had wanted a bomb pop all summer, but the ice cream truck didn't come down here very often. She was practically dancing on the sidewalk, dropping the wrapper beside the curb as the truck drove slowly up the road and away from us. She took a big bite, getting almost the entire tip of the bomb pop in one giant chomp, and I saw as her throat worked in an attempt to get it all down. She wheezed, her air cutting off as the ice cream bulged her throat. I got scared, watching her hands scrabble at her throat as she tried to breathe, and as her eyes got wide, I saw something in them that made me remember that day 2 years before. She was seeing it, the Alegnarts, and it was proving itself much more lively than she had believed it could. I couldn't see it, but I watched as something took hold of her throat. It pressed the sides of her neck, breaking the ice cream and sending it sliding down even as her windpipe was closed off by those treacherous fingers. A paramedic would later claim that the ice cream must have melted enough to slide down the rest of the way, but I knew what I had seen. I'd seen those fingers as they made indentions on her throat. I had seen her look of terror as it killed her. I stood there, fear gripping me like those fingers, and tried to make my lips speak its name. That's where my mom found us, me still trying to speak, and Gabrielle already dead in the street. I never forgot that day, the day I watched my sister die. It was something that stuck with me for the rest of my life. Sam went next, but it wasn't entirely due to a lack of caution. Sam, like me, had experienced something at a very young age, and he had seen the Alegnarts before our mother had made it go away. It had made him incredibly cautious. Sam didn't take chances. He cut his meat fine enough to eat without teeth. He drank most liquids with a straw, and he never took a bite big enough to choke him. He took showers. He didn't go into water that went over his knees, and he didn't put his face in the water. No, what killed Sam was his work ethic. He was 4 years older than me, and when I was 12, he got a job. He worked nights, wanting to buy a car, and he worked almost every day after school. He was coming home on his bike one night, going over the bridge that would take him into the residential area where we lived, when a drunk driver came over the bridge and hit him. He fell off his bike, flying over the side of the bridge and into the water. The water wasn't deep. It was barely 4 feet, but when they pulled him out, the coroner was puzzled. I know he must have drowned, but it almost appears that he was strangled. He had shown Mom the bruises, and though she said it sounded dreadful, I could see in her eyes that she knew. I was 12 when she took me aside and told me that I was the oldest now. Your younger siblings need you now more than ever. Never forget that it's up to us to keep an eye on them, to keep them safe from the Alegnarts before he strikes again. That's just a story, I blurted out before I could think better of it. My mom shook her head at me. If you believe that, then I'll be having this discussion with your younger sister soon. You know better. You watched it kill Gabby. You saw it when it tried to kill you. Believe in this, and be cautious in everything you do. But why? I asked. Why does it follow us? It's always followed the members on my side of the family. It's what killed your grandfather, 2 of your aunts, and both of your uncles. It nearly killed your Aunt Stacy, but I stopped it. It's followed us since the old country, ever since your great-great-great-grandfather did something unforgivable. We were sitting in the living room after Sam's funeral, still dressed in our Sunday best, and it occurred to me that this was the same room Gabby and I were sitting in when we heard the ice cream truck. That seemed like 1,000,000 years ago now, not just 4, and I felt an odd sense of vertigo as I thought about it. Your thrice great-grandfather was a lumberman in Russia. He was respected. He was a pillar of the community. But the only thing he wanted was beyond his reach. He desired a woman who would not have him. He became desperate, so he went to speak with a bruja, a witch that lived on the outskirts of the village. He told the witch what he wanted, and she told him the price would be steep. He was a man of means, and he paid what she asked. She gave him potions and charms and spoke the words of mysticism, but none of it worked. The woman spurned his advances, and when he told the witch, she shook her head at him and said, "Then it's not meant to be. If your stars cannot be entangled, then they cannot. There's nothing to be done about it." He became irate, telling her that she would give him his money back if she couldn't get him what he wanted. She told him that could not be, that he had paid and taken his chances. Your great-great-great-grandfather became irate, and what he did next could not be taken back. He leapt across the table, knocking her crystals and baubles to the ground, and wrapped his fingers around her throat. He throttled her right there at her table, watching her face purpling, but the witch was not done yet. They say her lips never stopped moving, even as he strangled the life from her. And though he could not hear the words, he would remember them later. Alegnarts, Alegnarts, Alegnarts. She repeated them again and again, even as he strangled the life from her. He felt his own throat closing a little as the rage took him. When he finished, he let go of her and stepped back. He realized what he had done, and he sure was sorry, but there was no taking it back. Unknown to him, the witch had thrown her death curse on him, and it followed his bloodline for the rest of time. The Alegnarts follows us now, just waiting for the opportunity to squash us. It killed all but one of your great-great-grandfather's children, and your great-great-grandfather's children, and so on and so forth. It would have left only me, I suppose, but I saved your aunt, and have kept a close eye on her ever since. I told her husband about the legend, and now he watches her so I don't have to. That's why you have to help me watch your siblings, so it doesn't happen to them. And so I did. I watched over Nikki and Matthew like they were made of glass, and that's why they nearly made it to adulthood. Matthew was about 4 years younger than me, Nikki too, and it was strange to think of what they might get up to if given the opportunity. It didn't matter. I watched them like a hawk. I hovered over them ceaselessly, and though I think they resented it, they also understood. I stopped Matthew from choking on spaghetti when he was 9. I stopped Nikki from drowning in the kiddie pool when she was 11. I stopped Matthew from choking on a soda when he was 12. I stopped Nikki from choking on ice when she was 13. It was a full-time job, but thinking of Gabby made it easier. I had to save them, like I should have saved her, and it worked, until Nikki suddenly went off script. She wanted to go to the beach with her class in the 10th grade. Nikki, I don't think it's a good idea. I was 20 then, still living at home and watching after them. Nikki was 16 and Matthew was 14, and Dad had been dead for nearly 3 years. It was a heart attack. There had been a close call with Nikki, and she had nearly died after an accident with an allergic reaction to cigarette smoke. He had collapsed during it, and never gotten back up again. After that, I was even more attentive, watching for Dad and me, and it seemed like just the chance that the Alegnarts had been looking for. Well, I'm tired of never doing anything fun. I want to live a little. I'll be fine. Don't worry so much. Well, what if I chaperone the trip? What if I... No, she said, but she said it gently. I have to be responsible for myself sometime, even if it's just for a little while. My mother and I tried to talk sense into her, but she wouldn't listen. She went on the trip, telling us that she would be fine, but I went anyway. I watched from binoculars from my car, keeping a close eye on her as she splashed and played. I was too slow to save her, though. Too far away. She washed up an hour after the riptide got her. And then it was just me and Matthew. Matthew almost made it. He was so close. 17 and on the cusp of graduation. He had become like Sam, careful in the extreme. He saw the writing on the wall, had seen the Alegnarts many times, more times than he could count, and intended to beat the odds. He went nowhere. He came straight home, and he seemed to be certain that if he could make it to adulthood, he might beat the odds. He was sure of it, and as his 18th birthday approached, I kept an extra close eye on him. He was never far from my sight. We went everywhere together, and Mom commended me for my determination. I'd failed Nikki. I couldn't fail Matt. In the end, I never had a chance. We were watching TV, something mindless, when Matt got up and went to the bathroom. I got up too, but he shook his head, saying that he'd only be gone for a second. He needed to pee. It wasn't life-threatening. He went to the hall bathroom, and a moment later, I heard the toilet flush. I heard the water come on. I heard it go off. Then I heard a thump that had me running right away. He was sprawled on the ground, clutching at his throat and gasping for air. "Alegnarts, Alegnarts, Alegnarts," I cried, not wasting time looking for fingers as I acted quickly. Nothing happened. "Alegnarts, Alegnarts, Alegnarts," I cried again, but still nothing. I called for Mom, but she was out back hanging laundry and wouldn't discover that her youngest was dead until it was too late. I tried CPR, but his chest wouldn't rise. I checked for finger marks, but there were none. Nothing was squeezing his neck, I would later find out. What had happened was just bad luck. He'd slipped on the floor mat and hit his throat just right, so that his windpipe was crushed. It was a 1 in a million injury, but it didn't stop the family curse from being fulfilled. So I stood there and held his hand, being with him as he died. He was scared. God, he was scared, but I gave him all the love and all the support that I could pass on. After that, it was just Mom and I, but I've decided that it ends with me. I'm scheduled for a vasectomy next month. I do not intend to have children that I will then have to also watch die. Mom didn't understand. She was furious at first, but I think she gets it now. If I never procreate, then the curse ends with me. If I have to remain celibate or become a priest or something, then that's what I'll do. Either way, there will never be another target for the Alegnarts. And so, he will strangle out, as he has strangled out my bloodline. It seems the least I can do to honor the siblings that I couldn't save. It was sometime around dawn when they brought him out through the trap door. He looked at the woods, the wind rustling his shirt, and felt free for the first time in months. He had no thought of escape. Escape wouldn't get him what he wanted. B50967 wanted to be free, and this was how he got there. He didn't doubt that a double cross was coming, but if he killed this man who threatened the prison, perhaps he would be allowed to disappear into the trees and come out somewhere where no one knew he was a wanted man. He could keep moving, head west, blend in for a while, and then get back to the business of the hunt. He's a man, just like you and I, Cribs. If he can be killed, I know you can do it. You're my best man for the job. And he's a hunter, just like you. Show him your skills and earn your freedom. Escape and run, and I'll find you. Believe that, Cribs. I will find you. B50967 nodded and headed out under the watchful eye of the warden and Assistant Warden Strauss. Strauss was yawning, the cup of coffee steaming into the early morning air, as B50967 disappeared into the woods. They had given him a backpack, a sleeping bag, freeze-dried food that would last him at least 2 months, and enough knives to skin half the game out there. "Are you sure this is wise, Warden?" he asked, watching the man go and hearing him practically clank from the cutlery. "What is to stop him from simply disappearing into the woods and coming out on a freeway or a logging trail? You could have, in all likelihood, just released a murderer back into the wild." The warden shook his head. "He won't. He knows the consequences." Strauss laughed. "What? That you'll descend upon him like an avenging angel? I believe you might have overestimated yourself, my friend." The warden ignored his second-in-command as the two of them walked back through the under-prison. Strauss was someone who would rather believe that the people in these cells had mental issues or physical deformities than believe they were cursed or touched by the paranormal. If the warden had assumed his real form before him, Strauss would simply believe that he was hallucinating or he had been drugged somehow. The man was staunchly unimaginative, atheist to the extreme, and a perfect foil for the eternal warden of this prison. "Tell me, Strauss, how are our numbers looking?" "We currently hold about 1,500 inmates, 300 of which are low enough custody to be used in the work program. And no, I mean employment numbers. The military keeps inquiring if we need assistance, and I would like to keep the military out of my business." "Oh, well, we have moved some people around, promoted a few, demoted a few, and we have 4 shifts shored up into 4 groups with a captain, 5 sergeants, and 2 dedicated control room staff." "And the size of these groups?" the warden asked, already aware that Strauss was trying to keep the bad news to himself. "Well, we have enough for 2 18-man groups on day shift and 2 12-man groups for night shift." I can hear the but already. "Out with it, Strauss." "Well, we are expecting a few new hires once the graduating class at the local high school is finished, but we need an influx of new blood, and fast." "Are our people quitting with that much regularity?" the warden asked as they came out onto the rec shed and he pushed the lever to close the passageway behind them. "Well, no, but they are leaving." The warden gave him a withering look, clearly not having time for games, and Strauss elaborated. "In the last year alone, 10 officers have died, 8 more have gone missing, never to be seen again, and another 8 have quit mid-shift. The death rate for our employees is alarming, and the insurance payouts have caused our premiums to rise significantly." The warden waved it off. "Corrections is a risky profession. Everyone knows that. Stragview is no exception, and is, in fact, more dangerous due to the number of high-risk inmates we have. Inmate deaths have been high as well. This is nothing new." "Inmate deaths are one thing. Most of them don't have families for their crimes, since they are so heinous that they don't communicate with them. But losing so many officers is taking a toll. Place phone calls to those who have quit and offer them a position at the current pay rate. I guarantee some of them have debts and bills that are past due. They'll come back. Stragview is the most stable job in the area, and everyone needs money." Strauss shook his head. "I don't know, Warden. You may have to get creative if you mean to keep the lights on. 12 per shift is barely enough to run with, and 20 is going to make day shift a nightmare. A day shift crew should be nearly twice that many, but it was hard enough to get what we had. The warden shook his head. We'll get by. We always have. Something will come up. You'll see. As if he had manifested it, there was a call over the radio for the warden. He took the radio off Strauss's hip and answered it, and the control room sergeant told him someone was here to see him. Have they said the reason for it? They say they're here to help with your hiring vacancies. She's waiting in the attorney visit room. He looked at Strauss, handing him the radio and spreading his arms. See? What did I tell you? Strauss rolled his eyes, but the smile ruined it. Just don't sell the farm for a few chickens, yeah? The warden laughed. I have never been outdealed before, Herr Strauss, and I don't intend to start now. He walked across the compound, inmates and officers alike nodding and greeting him. It was a lovely day, late winter or early spring, and he was in high spirits. So what if the numbers were down? So what if the costs were up? It had happened before, and it would happen again. This prison had been here since the end of the Civil War, and it wasn't going to change now. He would endure. He always had, and there would be a good time after the bad. The warden just had to weather this storm and make it to the other side. He came into the admin hallway, the stretch between the control room and the prison itself, and glanced at the door to his old office. Had he really once done business there? It was Strauss's office now, but it looked so small when he thought of the room he had in the tower. He liked the feeling of looking down upon Christendom and seeing the work of his own hands. This was his kingdom, his domain, and he reveled in the feeling of standing above it. He came to the door of the attorney room and nearly did a double take. For a moment, she'd been sitting there, Jessie, with her long blonde hair and her blue scrubs, her eyes smiling, her mischievous eyes and her inviting mouth. He hadn't loved her, not really, but he had enjoyed her in a way beyond carnality. He had enjoyed talking to her, being around her, and it had been lonely when she was gone. But such was life, and now it appeared she had weaseled her way back in. He must have pushed the door a little harder than he meant to, because the woman jumped as he came in, and the illusion seemed to break. She had blonde hair, but it was the dark brownish blonde. She wasn't wearing scrubs, but a cardigan and a long skirt. She had thick sandals, the cork kind, preferred by hippie types, and her gold-rimmed glasses winked as they set on her nose. She was pretty, but she wasn't Jessie, and that put him at ease a little. My apologies, I thought you were someone else. I'm the warden. What can I do for you? The woman adjusted her surprise and got back to something more normal. I had come in hopes that I could help you. My name is Miss Evergreen, and I'm here with an interesting proposition. The warden took a seat, his eyes boring into her as he looked for any sign of deception. It better be a good one. I've been propositioned by the best. She grinned coquettishly. I imagine you have, but I've come to talk about your staff shortage. The warden raised an eyebrow. Oh, and how would you know about that? It's common knowledge that most correctional institutes are in need of people willing to stay. The problem is that the job is likely to wear them down, so they quit within a few years. Just as you really get them trained, they leave and go somewhere else. Now, what if I told you I could fix that for you? I'd be highly skeptical. I don't know anyone who can fix corrections in one fell swoop. Well, look no more, because I have the answer. I can deliver you a tireless workforce that will put all others to shame, and it's from a source that's right under your nose. Get to the point, miss. I have a prison to run. Miss Evergreen reached into her purse and took out a slate-colored rock with a face carved into it. It was a laughing totem the face intricately carved. He had started to anger when he saw it, thinking it was the one in his cabinet, but as she held it, the warden saw it was different as night and day. "Had you going for a second, didn't I?" she said with a wink. "It's not quite the same as yours, but it works in much the same way." "What do you—" But he stopped when the little rock began to glow. As he watched, something materialized beside her, the light in the room growing dimmer as it took shape. It was human-sized, its glow light and ethereal, and when it came into view, the warden realized he recognized it. It was a haggard-looking form in a brown uniform, the kind they used to call muds. He had a short little beard, a beanie cap, his pants rolled up to reveal the tips of his boots. In life, his name had been Farley, and he had once been a groundskeeper back in the early 50s. He had been raking leaves and moving the grass right up until something had come from under the tool shed and dragged him into the caves below. The warden had always suspected it was one of the huge rats that lived down there, but even he didn't quite dare venture that deep into the earth. Farley hadn't been seen in about 70 years, and it appeared he hadn't been lounging around down there all this time. It appeared he had caught a terminal case of dead. "What the hell is this?" the warden asked. "Farley, be a dear and go move those boxes for me," Miss Evergreen said, pointing to a little stack of cardboard boxes in the corner. He took them from one side to the other, stacking them up and then returning to her side obediently. He was as loyal as any dog, and he stood silently by her side as he waited for orders. "He's such a dear, isn't he? He never tires, he never stops, and he's loyal to a fault. Wouldn't you just kill for a workforce like that?" The warden found that he was nodding slowly, ready to make a deal if she could get him the spirits that called this place home. "How many of them can you get me?" he asked, fearing the answer a little. "How many do you need?" she asked, smiling like the cat that's got the cream. B50967 had been traveling through the woods all day, and he still hadn't seen any end to this place. He had heard rumors from both officers and inmates about the Stragview woods, but it appeared that they hadn't come close. Nothing grew here, nothing besides nettles and thorny creepers. The ground seemed almost porous, and it hadn't taken him long to take to the trees. He would have preferred to secure himself in a cave or something, but the ground made him want to be up high. So he hid in the trees and watched as the creatures ran by at night. There was a pack of them, 20 or 30 as far as he could tell, and amongst them was a person. This had to be his target, but B50967 watched and waited. He could be patient. He had time. A.W. Strauss came up to the tower when called on the radio. "Yes, Herr Warden, what can I—" But the thought slipped off the tip of his tongue when he saw the creatures. They were glowing, a ragged collection of officers in old uniforms, and as he looked around, he saw more. Officers, inmates, volunteers, educators, all the victims of Stragview at one time or another. They were becoming quite numerous now, standing at the ready, and Strauss grabbed his chest as his mind and his heart raced. "Be not afraid, Strauss," the warden said from behind his desk. "This is Miss Evergreen, and she is here to solve our staffing problems." "What is this?" Strauss gasped, feeling his poor heart somersault. "Have a seat, and I'll gladly explain it." Strauss did, and by the end, he understood. He didn't like it. It was antithetical to everything he held dear. But he understood. How are the new recruits doing, Cutter? The big man was standing in Security Chief Ridley's office, watching the cameras and making note of the blind spots. Cutter had been a Marine in the sandbox long enough to cut most situations to the bone with a single observation. He hadn't been your average jarhead, one of those gung-ho rifle-toters who usually got wasted by an IED, or random bouts of gunfire from insurgents. No, Cutter was one of those guys with enough black ink on his file to make you lift your eyebrow. Brave Marker, a company that did not exist as far as anyone was concerned, was one of those units that came in with extreme prejudice and left bodies and destruction behind. Cutter couldn't tell you his body count before joining this little organization, but it had been double digits that were creeping closer to that fabled triple digit every time they gassed up the chopper. This post had helped him get there, but it also allowed him to practice his special brand of violence on people who could probably clip him from reality with nothing but a thought. Scare them young, and they would never step up to you again, just like cats did to puppies. Not so new anymore. You'll have some solid additions to the snatch team, probably some minders too. I hear that little bitch we picked up near Massachusetts is probably going to graduate. A couple of others are testing really well too, so we might be able to graduate a couple of them from this class. Ridley still had his back to the man, staring at the monitors as he watched his charges move about the compound. There were a few less. The 20 had become 18, but that was to be expected. Chandra had been the first, but the death of the blue band named Jax had been a bit of a surprise. The red bands sometimes killed each other in combat practice. The green bands often burned out due to mental strain, but the blue bands were often where you got most of your graduates and your washouts. Jax hadn't died in some accident. He hadn't been killed by a vindictive classmate, and it had actually been something far more commonplace. Jax had made no secret about the fact that he liked Choco Buddies, a candy bar they stocked in the vending machine. Apparently, the ones he ate at home had never been anything but chocolate and nougat, but the last batch they had gotten was a new kind, with peanuts instead of nougat. Jax hadn't been paying attention when he went for his mid-afternoon snack, and he had died of anaphylactic shock before anyone realized what had happened. That had been unfortunate, but 2 deaths in 6 months wasn't so bad. Sometimes the deaths reminded them that they were mortal, and that despite their powers, they could be killed, even by something as mundane as peanuts. I see you getting close to Dex. Do you believe he'll work for us? Cutter thought about it, his hands making a rough noise as they sawed across his 5 o'clock shadow, and nodded. I think he will. Dex likes to help, and helping is something the Snatchers often like to pretend make their pursuits noble. Takes them a little longer to get jaded and run down if they think it's for the greater good. Hammershoal keeps going on and on about one of those blue bands too, the one that sees stuff. You might want to set him aside for later. He's been solving cold cases better than unsolved mysteries ever could. Cutter laughed at his own joke, but Ridley only watched the cameras on his eternal vigil. Not really for me to say, Ridley finally said. More for the others to speculate when the time comes. The bigwigs, Cutter replied, and Ridley nodded. They never save many. Last year they spared none, and I think the most I've ever seen them spare was 2. Ridley shrugged, his bony shoulders coming up from behind the wings of the chair. They have their ways. The 2 he was talking about had been a couple of white bands that had been able to manipulate the output of whatever they were close to. The power had played hell while they were here, and the kitchen cooks often reported the food they had made coming out in double portions. The 2 students, twin girls, hadn't been tested at finals and had been allowed to go to the world unburnt. They now stayed at a government facility within a nuclear plant, the output of which helped cut the government's bottom line when it came to energy costs. Before that, Ridley couldn't even think of who it had been before that. The twins had been 10 years ago, and no one had been spared after them. 18 is fine for midterm, Cutter, but we need to cut the fat after midterms are over. I want no more than 10 when finals come around. Cutter rasped his facial hair again. I don't think that'll be too difficult. We're about to start combat training in the red band class, and that usually weeds out a few. Green bands generally start burning out about now, if their mental acumen ain't strong. It's the blue bands, I figure, we'll have trouble thinning. There's a couple in there I wish we could keep. The tracker would be hell on wheels for snatching. Ridley turned around, and Cutter stepped back under the weight of that glare. Don't overreach, Cutter. These children are not tools. You know why they're here, and you know what they're meant for. Don't get greedy or stupid. The moment we start keeping them, the moment we stop burning them out and start making a private army, the federal government will burn us to the ground. Cutter nodded. I was just talking, he said, turning to go. Don't pretend it ain't something you've never thought about. Ridley turned back to the monitors, and Cutter left. He had considered it. He had thought about it long and often, but it would ultimately amount to nothing. The federal government would never allow it, but Ridley was pretty sure that if he set his mind to it, he could build a small army of powerful people, and the government would never be the wiser. The problem was the reason that he had taken the children in the first place. They were here to fulfill a purpose. They were his sacrifice and his life's work, and he needed that to continue if the world was to continue. If there was a God, Ridley thought he would understand. If there was a God, Ridley meant to ask him why he had done this in the first place, before he undoubtedly condemned him to hell. Janice was trying to stay cool, but her eyes were constantly roving over the kids in the cafeteria. Ridley had been keeping her too busy to return to base, but as she got some lunch, she realized that 6 months had passed since she was last here. She wondered if he was still alive, her hands shaking as she made her salad, and figured he must be, or she would have heard about it. She had heard about the girl who had had the hemorrhage and the boy who had the peanut allergy, but those had been the only 2 reported deaths. That was rare. She remembered classes that had ripped each other to shreds. Her own class had been halved by midterm, and only the blue bands like her had been spared. By the time finals came around, she had been one of 5 students left, and 4 of them had been blue bands. But that's what happens when your red bands start a coup and have to be put down. She shivered when she heard him, and it took every fiber of her being not to turn around and look at him. He was alive. She watched him in the mirror from behind the bar and saw him and his friends walking to a table near the wall. He was popular, it seemed. Most of the class was sitting with them, and they were all talking animatedly about their classes. A few others were sitting here and there, but Dunstan seemed to be part of the largest of the friend circles. Suddenly, she wanted to talk to him so badly. She wanted to ask him about his day, to see how his studies were going, to tell him how much he looked like her, to tousle his hair, and to tell him how proud of him she was. His smile could have been on any one of her baby pictures. His hair was the same light brown as hers, and she was glad that he hadn't gotten anything from his father, whoever that had been. Then, suddenly, he felt her looking at him and glanced her way. His smile slipped a bit, his eyes revealing a lack of recognition, and she turned away and took her tray to the teacher's area. He hadn't known her. Of course he hadn't. He had never met her. He didn't know who she was. She had never been there for him until he was abducted and dragged to this place. He wouldn't want to know her, and who could blame him? "Jan," someone called, and she looked up to see Wheeler was sitting at a table by himself. She smiled, some of her joy returning. She hadn't seen Wheeler in 5 months, and this sudden appearance was a balm to her wound. She put her salad down across from him, sniffing at the huge burger that he was working his way through. "Better be careful, stud. Those things will catch up with you." Wheeler shrugged. "I'd rather die from a burger than the errant blast of one of these damn kids." Janice nodded, taking a bite as she mulled it over. "What brings you back to the site?" she said, through a mouthful of lettuce. They wanted me to help with the midterms for the red bands. I don't know what, but they get what they want." They chewed, each of them trying to find something to say. "Your observation go well?" she asked, grasping at straws. "Pretty well," he said, wiping his mouth. "We found a few kids the site was interested in, and I don't think they'll be too hard to snatch. You?" Janice nodded. "About the same. One of them is definitely going to be a problem. I haven't seen a pyrokinetic in a while. This one is definitely powerful." Wheeler nodded, slowly. "How was Trask?" he asked, referring to her partner on the mission. "Not a good match. He honestly just sat around and listened to college football on his phone. He wasn't into anything I was reading. He didn't like to talk, and it was very dull." Wheeler nodded again. "Jezzy never shut the hell up. It was just chatter, chatter, chatter. She never wanted to talk about anything besides what she was into. It was a pain." Janice made a sound as she ran her fork through her salad. "I heard she's a popular partner. Supposed to be amazing in bed, they say." Wheeler snorted. "What, you jealous?" "Maybe," Janice hedged. Wheeler laughed. "I never touched her, don't worry. She wanted to, but I've been kinda hung up on someone from work," he said, looking up at her leadingly. Janice sighed, reaching slowly across to squeeze his fingers. "That's too bad. I happen to be a little hung up on a sweet guy from work too, but office romances are pretty frowned upon." He squeezed her fingers back before pulling his hand away. "Well, maybe we'll get paired together again so we can spend some time trying to get over our office flings." Janice smiled, her salad mostly forgotten. "I like that." Dr. Hammarskjöld winced as the door was slammed shut and looked up to find Cutter looming against the door to his office. "I've asked you to knock," the little doctor said, looking back at his computer. "Ridley says he wants to cut the class in half before finals." Hammarskjöld looked up, his eyebrows sliding together. "What?" "Yeah, he wants to go down to 10 before finals. Better get your tight 5 ready, because I think this will be the year I have a red band class, with more than one at the end." Hammarskjöld made a noise in his throat. "I'll talk to him. If we can get all 18 to graduation, more the better. Why does he..." "Obviously, he wants to breed competition. He doesn't want to graduate 18, little man. He wants to graduate the best. That's what he'll get. We both know the green bands will begin to drop off as they always do. That little girl will probably be fine, but the others, they'll probably start dropping like flies." Hammarskjöld shook his head. "The glee you take in the death of children is truly chilling." Cutter laughed. "Why not? Are they not brought here for a special purpose? Why not let them fulfill it as intended?" He left then, thankfully, and Hammershoal rubbed at the bridge of his nose. Midterms were going to be brutal this year. He could already tell. I've been participating in the Luke St. James mystery puzzle books since I was very young. If you're unfamiliar with the company, Luke St. James makes puzzle books that have everything from crosswords to Sudoku, from word searches to word problems, and everything in between. Luke St. James mystery books had everything. They had been around for over 100 years, and they are one of the earliest makers of puzzle book games that I could find. They claim to have started out as brain teasers and riddles and slowly integrated into more popular puzzle book games. My dad was always obsessed with them, spending hours scouring them, despite the fact that most of them were already completed. My grandpa, too, he was the one who gave me my very first puzzle book when I was young, and he would often look at them when I was finished and nod. "Good work, boy. My hands are too unsteady to work the pen anymore, but my mind is still sharp enough to work the answers out." Dad used to look at my answers too. He would practically rip them out of my hand when I offered the finished books to him, and then he would go over them a page at a time like he was looking for something. I never understood. Dad scared me a little, well, a lot, and he mostly stayed in the back of the house while Mom and I stayed out of his way. Mom said that he hadn't always been like that. She said that he was a very intelligent man, was a gifted mind, and that he had been very charming when she had met him in college. He'd been a teacher at the college after graduating, teaching linguistics and ancient languages, and he had worked for the FBI to crack ciphers and codes when they needed someone knowledgeable. She said he seemed like he was happy, but there was always something on his mind. She would be eating dinner with him, laying in bed, just watching TV, and this look would pass over him like static on a TV screen. She said it was pretty unsettling, but she just assumed that it was something that happened to men who were hyper-intelligent. Then, one day, he came home with a bunch of those St. James puzzle books, right about the time you turned 2, and he never quite climbed out of them. He died last year, and it took us a while to find him. Sometimes Dad wouldn't come out of his study for days on end, and that made his comings and goings hard to track sometimes. Sometimes he wouldn't eat for days, just sitting in the back room and mumbling loud enough that you could hear him from under the door. And then I would wake up the next morning and find Mom cleaning up a bunch of pots and pans where he had woken up and cooked a king-size meal for just himself before heading back to his study. Things like this had gone on for 18 years. I was in college myself before he died, and I think if his accounts hadn't been continuing to pay the bills, Mom would have taken me and left him. So when I went to tell him that dinner was ready one night, and wasn't greeted by the loud mumblings that usually came from beneath his door, I stopped and listened. There was always some sign that Dad was in there. His shadow as he walked fitfully across the floor, the soft mumbling as he worked something out, the creak of the floorboards or his comfy chair, or something that let me know that he was in there. Today there was nothing, silence, and it struck me as wrong. I reached for the knob and remembered how much Dad hated to be disturbed before walking away instead. This repeated itself for nearly a week before I found my hands turning that knob and breaking the cardinal rule of Dad's study. I had never actually been in Dad's study in the whole time I had lived in the house. The door was always either locked or barred by the understanding of what waited for you on the other side. Mom could tell me that Dad was kind and charismatic, all she wanted, but the only Dad I had ever known was a tired, sullen, angry man You did not go into his study unless the house was on fire. You knocked, you spoke your business, and you left. If you walked in, you got the full brunt of a screaming, spitting, angry jackal who was defending its pups from an intruder. I had only done it once or twice, and both times had been enough to make me never want to open it again. So as the door came open, and I saw him sitting there with his back to it, and his head leaned back, I thought he might be asleep. "Dad?" I asked quietly. "Dad, are you okay?" He didn't say anything. "Dad," I said again, taking a step towards him. He didn't say anything. I came up beside him, my anxiety at an all-time high, but when I saw his face, I felt my teeth come together hard. His face was frozen in a look of abject horror, his mouth hanging open in a silent scream. I backed out of the room and called for Mom. He had been dead for about a week, but none of us had known, and we could have gone right on not knowing if I hadn't broken the rules and gone to check on him. It was a small funeral. Dad didn't have any friends, and most of his colleagues at the college had stopped trying to contact him a long time ago. It was a few cousins, my mom, my grandpa, and me. Grandpa is wheelchair-bound, his arthritis so bad that it's motorized, and after the service, Mom asked if he would like to come and stay at the house instead of returning to his nursing home. It would save you a trip, and we have a room available now that Murray is gone, she finally settled on. "Sure, if I won't be in the way," he said. "I'm fairly independent, but I know I can be a little bit of a pain to have an old man hanging around." "We don't mind, do we?" she said, looking at me. "Not a bit," I said, meaning it. As much of a bear as Dad had been, Grandpa was a teddy bear. I went and visited him often, and he still checked over my puzzle books when I got done with them. We shared a love of puzzles and strange knowledge, and Grandpa had been more of a father to me than my own father had. Having Grandpa move in would be great. I had mostly been staying so Mom wouldn't be by herself, and having two people to talk to in the house would be nice. So, when I got home from the funeral, I started cleaning out the study so Grandpa could stay in it. The room wasn't large, a little bigger than a bathroom, and it smelled like a bathroom too. The place reeked of sweat and unwashed flesh, and now there was also a rotten odor that I associated with a corpse. Dad had made a regular little nest in here, pinning things to the wall and leaving notes pinned to them so that he could decipher them. The more of them I took down, the more I realized that it was pages out of the Luke St. James books. It wasn't even any particular kind. There were crosswords next to Sudoku, next to searches, next to riddles, and so on and so forth. They nearly covered all four walls, covering the windows as well, and as I took them down and put them in a garbage bag, one phrase kept jumping out at me: the Luke St. James mystery giveaway. Dad had written it again and again, and it seemed to be the center of this spider web that he had been papering the walls with. He'd been looking for it for a long time, it would seem, and pretty soon I stopped putting papers in the bag and started taking them back out again. The notes were pretty clear that Dad had been close to discovering whatever this giveaway was, and soon I came to a description of it amidst a myriad of notes. The Luke St. James Mystery Giveaway, a contest devised by the mysterious Luke St. James himself. Luke St. James, world traveler and man of mystery, is said to have hidden the location of a fabulous treasure in the pages of his books. He claims that the last clue would come out of book number 100,000, and then those who participated in the search would have all the clues to find the treasure. The clues are scattered throughout the other workbooks, spanning back to the start of the company and modern day. Whoever deciphers the riddle will discover the greatest treasure the world-traveling man of mystery has ever owned. I looked down at the notes, most of which came with draconian symbols and descriptions, and took them to my room to study them further. After a few hours of trying to make sense of them, I was stumped. I knew what Dad had been searching for now, and he had done a lot of work, but it seemed he had only a few of the answers he needed. I needed a different perspective on this. I needed a partner for this little endeavor. Gramps. He looked up from his chair, sitting in the living room and reading quietly. Yes? Have you ever heard of the Luke St. James mystery giveaway? He went rigid, his eyes going wide. How did you find out about that? There's no way your dad would have told you about it. He didn't, but while I was cleaning out his study, I found all these notes. Seems to be some kind of contest or something, and I think it was what he'd been looking for all this time. Grandpa leaned around the back of his chair, clearly seeing if my mother was paying attention, before wheeling closer. Let's take this conversation somewhere a little more private, kid. He followed me to Dad's study, now divested of its notes and cryptic charts, and closed the door softly behind himself. Yes, I've heard of it. It was I who told your father about it, and I wish I hadn't now. It lit a mania in him, a puzzle that no one had ever solved, and he meant that he would be the one to solve it. I ruined him, and I don't want to ruin you as well. I'd like you to let it go, please. It's not worth it. It never was. But if Dad nearly solved it, I don't believe he did. I don't think anyone has ever solved it, and they never will. Don't let it control you like it controlled him. Just get rid of his notes and pretend that you never read any of it. I gripped the bag a little tighter, not wanting to get rid of it, but as I nodded, I saw Grandpa relax a little. Good. You're doing the right thing, kid. Nothing good can come of it. Keep at your studies and make something of yourself. And let this die. I left with the bag of papers, letting Grandpa explore his new space. I stood at the crossroads in the hallway for a while, looking down at the door that would take me to the garage so I could get out the garbage cans, and then to my own room that would allow me to hang on to them. I loved the puzzles. I think I said that, and this was a puzzle beyond puzzles. I stood there, torn for quite a while, but in the end, I let my obsession get the better of me. I took the bag to my room, I hid it in my closet, and after dinner, I started working on the mystery that had killed my father. Dad's notes were pretty easy to follow, and I got the threads of it pretty quickly. Dad had been very busy over the years, and the more I read, the more I really did believe that he had been close to solving it. He had determined that whatever the answer was, it led to a series of numbers. He had a sequence from a Sudoku puzzle, words from crosswords and word searches that he had converted into more numbers, and on and on and on. Dad had found the clues to find the puzzles he needed, but he was short 2 pages and 2 numbers. These were the last 2 things I needed, and I just needed to find them to solve my dad's final puzzle. I started working on it after school. Grandpa was right. I needed to finish school and have something to fall back on. The clues were 2, and they were both cryptic. The crown of madness within the mirror, 2258, was the first one. Not something I understood, though Dad's notes thought it might have something to do with brain surgery or lasers. The second was the cage of snow holds secrets of flight, 8643. I didn't have a clue what any of that meant, but unlike Dad, I had resources that he had never used. They say you can find anything on the internet, and they weren't wrong. Reddit had a few subs about the mystery, and a few other sites had speculations, but I began to see that Dad was the farthest along. Some of them were sharing notes, most of them were working on parts of the riddle so they could get the prize and share it, and a couple of them were asking questions I know I had the answers to. What's more, one of them knew why the answers had to be numbers. "It's coordinates," he said. "We just need all the numbers, and then it'll tell us exactly where the treasure is." I had to trade a little, some clues that hadn't quite made sense, but they helped me figure out the number at the end of the clues, too. They were book numbers, the sequence numbers on the puzzle books that would have the answer. Luckily, I had 8643 on my shelf. I had gotten it completely at random a few weeks ago, and it seemed almost poetic that my dad hadn't noticed and taken it from me. I started flipping through it, searching for clues, and then I came to a puzzle called Birds of a Feather, two of the words jumping out at me. A 4-letter word for a bird's home, which I identified as cage, and an 8-letter word for someone who travels to a warmer climate, which I had identified as snowbird, which meant between them was a single word, and it seemed to fit the pattern: dove. According to Dad's cipher, that made the number 46. I'd done it. I'd discovered another piece, and now I was on to the next one. This one proved to be a little more difficult. I didn't have book 2258, and it proved to be something that I couldn't just buy off of Amazon like I usually did. It was rare, something from the late 80s, and it was proving hard to find. I scoured the internet, looking everywhere for a copy, and I'd even taken to going to thrift stores and secondhand shops. I asked people on the subreddit if they had copies, but so far, no one had found one that was fully intact. Dad had hundreds, maybe thousands of these puzzle books, but this one had eluded him. I started to understand my dad's frustration, wondering how he had done this for 18 years. I remembered the infrequent packages that came in, the only time I saw my dad come out in the daylight, and how happy it made him to run back to his office with them. Was that all that awaited me? Was this chase all that life held for me? Someone called my name, and I looked up to find my mom at the door to my room. When I looked up from my computer screen that I'd been working on, it was pretty clear that she'd been calling me a few times. "The moving truck has your grandpa's stuff from storage. Could you help him bring it in, please?" I nodded. I needed a break, and went to help with boxes. Grandpa had brought a few things from the nursing home, but the majority of his stuff had been in storage. He had finally gotten enough together to pay a moving company to bring it, and as I carried boxes to his new room, I saw that he had installed some bookshelves, a desk, and a thin single bed in one corner across from a TV he hung on the wall. The moving guys and I emptied the truck, not a hugely taxing operation, and as the boxes sat stacked against the study wall where my father had worked himself to death, I turned to leave my grandpa to it. "Would you mind helping me unpack a little? It's hard in my chair, and I'm sure the two of us could get it done in no time." I started to tell him I didn't have time, but I decided to take a longer break from the mystery of Luke St. James and his little prize. I unpacked a bunch of knickknacks, some photos of Grandpa and my dad when he was a kid, some old westerns, clothes that were still somehow on the hangers, and a box of jewelry, before I got to the box I seemed to have been looking for. I opened it, and my breath stuck in my throat as I beheld the bounty that lay before me. There were so many, all of them stacked one on top of the other, and I realized that they were mine. The one on top still had my name on it in the unsteady writing of a 5-year-old. Grandpa had kept all of them, every single one that Dad hadn't taken, and he even had some of them that my dad had later discarded. It was a whole box of Luke St. James puzzle books, and I reckoned that he had about 100 or more of them. "You thought I just threw them out?" Grandpa said with a smile. "Nah, kid, I was always proud of your hard work. At first, I was also working on the mystery, but after a while, they just became a source of pride for me. I liked knowing that the cleverness your father and I had always prided ourselves on had carried on to you, and I still am. It was hard not to hear him say that and give up on the fruitless search, but even as he admonished me, I was already weighing the chances of finding the one that I needed. The odds were not in my favor, but I had to try. I took them over to the bookshelf just as I had the westerns and a few pulp novels that he had, and started shelving them. They started in the 1500 range, and that excited me a little. It meant they might hold the one I was after, and my hands were sweating as I took them out. They fluctuated, sometimes jumping by hundreds of volumes, and as I shelved them, Grandpa talked about things that had happened when I was a kid or when my dad was a kid. He became so much background noise, a drone of flies, as I watched the numbers. Grandpa had been nice enough to put them in some kind of order, and as they crept into the 2000s, I got excited all over again. When it went from 252 to 278, I felt like screaming, but a couple of volumes later I found it. Volume 2258 of the Luke St. James mystery books. I had owned it once. I could own it again. Hey, Gramps, could I borrow this one? Grandpa looked at the book questioningly, reading over the cover and getting even more confused. You finished that one when you were 9, kiddo. What do you need it for? Oh, I just want to look at it. I think I remember it, and I want to see it. I guess so, but I don't know why you would need a... Then his face darkened a little, as realization hit him. You're chasing that damn mystery, aren't you? I thought I told you to leave it alone. It consumed your father. It nearly consumed me. If you keep on like this, it'll consume you too. This is the last piece, Gramps. Once I get this, I can find it, and then it can't haunt anyone anymore. He shook his head. Take it then. Take it and go. I'd expected better of you, but I suppose you're just like your father. He let me go then, and I ran from his room with my book. I felt terrible, but I was still hungry for answers. I scrabbled through the book, looking desperately for something to do with lasers or surgery or something. The book had none of these things, no matter how many times I flipped through it. I was getting frustrated. The pages crinkled under my fingers, and when my eyes fell on something, I felt a spark of hope. It was a word search about Alice in Wonderland, and the words crown and mirror jumped out at me. Between the words on the search, all of it done in my shaky 5-year-old hand, was the word Hatter. I felt my breath catch. This was it. I did the math and came up with 71. I put it with the others I had come up with and was left with a 16-digit number if I were to put them all together. The guys on Reddit seemed to have been right. Looked like it had to be a set of coordinates. Now I just had to figure out where it went to. How hard could that be, right? I floundered with how to start using these numbers for a few days, not even sure what to do with them. I had them, but they weren't in any order. I should know. I tried plugging them in and came up with a location in the middle of the ocean. I started plugging them in randomly. There were only so many combinations, after all. Grandpa wasn't talking to me when I had reason to be around him, which was mostly just meals, and Mom seemed to have noticed. She asked if we were fighting or something, and I told her it was just a disagreement. She said that we should get over it, that we were too close to be acting like this. I agreed, but I knew that he never would. I was also extremely distracted by my search for the proper coordinates. After 2 months, I had narrowed it down to 3 locations. Most of the coordinates were either for places overseas, which I hoped was not where the treasure was located, locations in the ocean, and a handful of places here in the United States. Of those here in the States, only 3 seemed to be viable. One was on a decommissioned military base. One was in the middle of a mall in the Midwest, and one was a farm near New York. I had narrowed it down by Googling the locations, seeing if there were any relevancy to Luke St. James, and that was how I came to these three. The military base had been somewhere that he had been taken after an expedition had gone amiss and he needed emergency rescue. The mall had once been a place that had been used to print his earlier books. The farm was somewhere very personal to him and seemed to have the best claim for a place where he would bury some great treasure. The farm, as it turned out, was his childhood home. He had grown up here with an older brother and his mother, and it had been the place where he had begun devising his puzzles and the things that had made him famous. He published his first book here. Here began his company, and it seemed the right place to look for his treasure. I had a break coming up from school. Spring break was a great time to take a trip, so I packed some things and told my mom I'd be out for a few days. She told me to have fun, but the look my grandpa gave me wasn't his usual disapproving stare. He looked intrigued, as if he wondered if I had found something that had escaped my father and he. I headed out, the farm about 6 hours from here, and as I drove, I couldn't help but wonder what sort of treasure Luke St. James had buried on his family farm. I had already prepared for the inevitability that somebody had found it and just not told anyone. I would find an empty box or an empty crevice, maybe with a note left by whoever had gotten there first. And this would be just a fun story to tell sometime. Grandpa would laugh at me when I told him and say that this was just how things were. Maybe it would mend the hurt feelings between us, something I wanted very badly. It'd be nice to find something else to hyperfixate about. If it wasn't an empty box, though, it could be anything. Luke St. James had been a world traveler, and his treasure could be gold or jewels or even ancient artifacts. It would likely be taken by the New York government once they found out about it, but I was willing to take that chance. It was all about finding it for me, and I was excited to come to the end of the chase. When I came to Cabrier, I got a hotel for the night and started looking for a map of the area. Cabrier is a tiny little town with 2 stoplights and more farms than businesses, but the old guy at the library laughed as he photocopied me a map that looked older than I was. No one needs a map of this place, not for a long time. There isn't enough of this place to make a map. Someone from the Farm Council made one in the 1960s, and not much has changed since. With the map in hand, I headed to the old St. James farm, now called Reisman Place. The Reismans had a nice spread, about 300 acres they were using to graze cows and sheep on, and the old farmer was sitting on the porch when I pulled up. I saw him sigh, clearly having gone through this before, and as I raised a hand in greeting, he got straight to the point. "I assume you're here to look for that Luke St. James mystery treasure. No, I don't know where it is. No, I haven't found it. No, I don't have any of his stuff. And no, you cannot just go randomly digging around in my field." I nodded. I should have expected that. "Actually, sir, I have coordinates to the treasure. It's in the woods near the edge of your property. I just wanted to ask permission before I went out there and started looking around." I pointed, not really wanting to show him the coordinates, and he nodded. "I got one request," he said, grinning as he pointed to a little shed behind the house. "You mind if I come with you? I've been hearing about this thing for years, and I'd like to at least see it. Hell, you're the first fella who hasn't come out here and just wanted to start digging." I laughed, nodding if I asked if he had an extra shovel. I'd brought a trowel and suddenly felt kind of unprepared. A few minutes later, we were heading out and away from the farm as we headed for the woods. The biography I had listened to while I was working on the location had told me that Luke St. James had played in these woods a lot with his older brother when they were younger, and it was a place he spoke of often as a place he would always treasure. That line had always stood out to me, and It was why I had come here first. The farmer talked the whole way there, telling me about people who had come snooping here. He had tried his hand at the Luke St. James puzzle for a while, but it was a little over his head, he said. Some of them didn't even ask. They just came out here at night and started digging. He had come out one night, the moon full, and found some fella digging in his sheep field. One of them had snuck under the house, digging into the foundation as he looked for anything. He had found him a few days later when he ran out of food. He had just started on a story about the guy who tried to drive a backhoe onto his cow field when we came to the spot that the coordinates said should hold the treasure. It was a little hole in the ground, too small for a large person, but just perfect for a child. We dug around for a little bit, but it appeared that the cave wasn't something that we could just dig into. "I've got a pickaxe," Farmer Reisman said, and as he ran back to the farm, I took out my flashlight and decided to see what was in that little cave. I had already established that I couldn't climb into it and didn't really want to. There could be a deep shaft awaiting me, and having to spend some time in a dark cave with broken bones as I waited for rescue services sounded pretty terrible. I couldn't see much, the hole was oddly shaped, but I decided a picture might be just as good. I hung the phone down, snapped a photo, and then I brought it back up. I nearly dropped the phone again when I saw what was waiting for me down there. Farmer Reisman came back with his pickaxe, and I advised him to call the police. "Why? Something dangerous down there?" "Maybe, but there's definitely a child's body down there, and they probably won't appreciate us dropping rocks on it." He went and called the police, and I stayed there and tried to figure out exactly what I had stumbled across. What followed was cops, a lot of explaining, and the disclosure of some information I had been jealously guarding for a while. I told them about the giveaway, the clues, the coordinates, and how I had come to find the body. They didn't think I had anything to do with the body being down there. They made that very clear. And after the questions were answered, the detective took a baggie out of an envelope and left it on the table for me. "What is it?" I asked as he got up to leave. "That's for you, or more importantly, for whoever finds the Luke St. James Mystery giveaway treasure. It's a photocopy. We kept the original as evidence, but I think it might shed some light on what's going on here." I picked up the bag and looked at the note, reading over the rough handwriting as the detective watched me. "To you, the winner of my giveaway, I say congratulations. I have been around the world several times, seen wonders beyond imagination, but what you have found remains my greatest treasure. Brandon St. James, my older brother, went missing when I was 12. He was 13, a year older than me, and his imagination was such that he never ceased to make our games something to look forward to. We found the cave when I was 6. It was our secret hideout, the place we hid things that mattered to us. We played there until I could no longer fit through the opening. Brandon was older, but he wasn't as big as me. He still used it to hide secrets well into his teens, and it became the place where he would hide his last secret. He left one night after a terrible fight with my parents, and what followed was a torrential rainstorm. I never saw him again, but I hoped he had gotten away. Years later, when I returned to the cave to see if I could find something I had left there, I got enough of my head in to find that it had become his final resting place. I don't know if he drowned down there or what happened to him, but he was dead. I left him there, never telling a soul about what had happened to him. You are possibly the only person who knows where he lies. I mourned my brother. His imagination made me want to make puzzles and games and riddles for imaginative children and adults. And now, he is my final riddle to you. I hope you enjoyed discovering his tomb, because by the time you find him, I too will be in the ground. Thank you for your efforts, and please, Stay curious. Luke St. James, Esquire. I sat there for a long time, just looking at the note and trying to figure out what to do with all this. In the end, I took my prize and went home. I still had the picture of the skeleton and the note with his signature and decided to post it in hopes of ending the mystery. My grandpa and I had a long talk about it, and he congratulated me for solving the mystery. You did something neither me or your father could accomplish. I'm sorry that I held it against you. Good job, boy. Good job. I don't think anybody online really believed me. I'm pretty sure that most of them are still looking for it, even though I've posted the coordinates and the final answers. Let them search if that's what they want to do. For them, the chase goes on, but for me, that's all there is. So there you are, all you who seek the treasure of Luke St. James. It died before many of you were born, in a hole in the ground. It was not a conversation I was supposed to hear. It was probably one I could have been killed for overhearing, if they'd found me listening. It started with a council meeting, one I had no reason for being at, other than association. The grapes in Arbor Meadow have been the territory of the Unseelie for a millennia untold, a representative from the Winter Court was saying. That is so, Queen Mab said, looking bored. The land is in Unseelie territory, and always has been. Then how is it that this wine merchant you represent, the Fae said, pointing to a councilman from Summer, came to be in possession of our grapes? He was aware that the grapes were from Unseelie territory, said the representative from Summer, which is why we purchased them rather than steal them. The representative of Winter scoffed. He bought them from goblins, not even from our merchants, who would never sell such a thing to Summer Fae. I would wager that that is why he was so keen to have them. Such things are rarely seen in the Seelie markets. I was spinning a pencil between my fingers, trying not to yawn, hoping that it would be over soon. Well, said Goblin stole grapes from our arbor, making your merchant an unknowing accomplice in this crime. The summer counselor rolled his eyes. Then take it up with the goblins. The merchant is not at fault for buying goods he believed to be legally obtained. The burden of crime falls on the party at fault, not the man who has purchased them. Yes, well, your client has in his possession a product made from our product, and we wish the product returned before it can flood the market with fraudulent impersonations of our wine. I yawned into the back of my hand, feeling my eyes getting heavy. This had nothing to do with me. Why was I even here? Yet again, this is not the fault of my client. The fault seems to be with the goblins that stole from you. Well, it is the fault of your client for— Enough, Titania said. Do we know which goblins are at fault? The winemaker reported that the goblins were the patch of Clan Moonsilk, my lady, said the representative of Summer. Those goblins are allied with the Unseelie court. Queen Mab, will you take it upon yourself to send a representative to see what can be learned? I will, Queen Mab said. If there is truth to this claim, then we shall take restitution from the clan to pay for the theft. My queen, what of the matter of the wine? The Winter Counselor asked. Healthy competition is always welcome within the market. If his wine is superior, then he may have to return to the less savory means to acquire more grapes. Once is a mistake, twice is a pattern. Let us see if he will seek the goblins out again once their crimes are thought to be brought to light. Queen Titania, will you advise the wine merchant of this, so we are not forced to sit through such nonsense again? I will. I believe that will end our meeting for today. We shall convene again when we have business to conduct. We rose, bowed to the queens, and took our leave. Well, they did. I stayed behind so I could have a word with the queens of Fae. "Excuse me, Queen Titania," I asked, the beautiful Fae woman looking down at me questioningly. "I was curious if there had been any news from your scouts." Queen Mab made a snooty noise. "If we had anything to tell you, we would have. Do not presume to rush the forces of nature, Brandylow." Titania looked at her sister with a long, suffering glance before turning back to me. "We have not. I am so sorry. Wherever the Green Man has her, he has hidden her well." I thought I might offer a suggestion," I said, seeing Mab bristle a bit before Titania put a hand out. "Let us hear him, Mab. He may have information we do not." "Such presumption! If this knowledge was obtainable by one such as him, what makes him think that we would not already know?" "Sometimes the ant knows things the sparrow does not. The rabbit holds secrets the wolf may never learn. Let us give him a chance." I bowed my head. "Thank you, my queen. A letter I received from her knight told us they were being drawn towards the state of Arkansas. Tobias thinks they might be heading for the Ozark Mountains, given their trajectory." "Interesting," Titania said. "So?" Mab asked. "I had thought it was information you might be able to use. It's a place to start, maybe." The queens looked at each other, nodded in unison, and Titania turned back with a small smile. "Thank you for this information, counselor. We will pass it along to those who are looking for the lady, and they will see what they will see. It was good of you to bring it to our attention." "Good for whom? We shall see," Mab added coldly. I bowed, turning to go. The queens conversed softly as I stepped out of the meeting hall, and as I prepared to step through the portal and into the grow room, I saw someone that I recognized. It was Wysanther, Titania's knight, and he was doing some very obvious skulking. I watched him around a corner, him not even noticing me, and felt moved to see where he was going. It was just a thought, a feeling more than anything, and I went slow so my hooves wouldn't clack on the stone floor. I needn't have worried about the sound. For someone in Fey-made armor, he was very loud. I followed him at a safe distance as he clinked and clanked through the halls towards wherever he was going. Finally, he took a left, stepping into a little room off the main hall, closing the door behind himself. I came up to lean closer, and it sounded as if there was someone in there with him. They were talking in low voices, their business likely clandestine, and as I leaned against the crack in the door, I listened intently. "And now they're heading for the Ozark Mountains. How the hell do they know where she is? I hear one of the Green Man's own is traveling with her. Maybe he knows where the Green Man's lair is." "Not a chance. He's never been there. Hell, I've never been there. It's hidden in the cave system deep under the mountains. There's no way a couple of nobodies are just going to stumble across it while out on a walk. If they do, though," he paused, thinking about it, "well, he has to keep her there until the cusp of spring. If he doesn't, well, he won't get what he's looking for, will he?" Holy hell, I thought. They were talking about the lady and the Green Man, and where she was being held. I didn't understand all of it, but I got some of it, and I stored all of it in my memory so that I could keep it for later. Tobias might know, and maybe I could get it to Randy, and he would know even more. I'd have to be careful. If they caught me, I'd be lucky to make it back to the garden in one piece. Has he figured it out yet? Does he know how to be whole again? I don't believe he does. He says he does, but I think he's lying. She won't tell him either. His minions, the whistling one, claims that he should beat her, but he's held himself in check so far. He doesn't believe that she will crack, no matter what he does. He thinks if he can study her, if he can learn from her, then he can achieve a form. And if he can't, then I believe the week before spring will be very bad for her. When faced with the idea of another year spent without a body, he might become desperate. Desperation breeds anger, and when he becomes angry, he may forget his promise to do her no harm. I stepped away. I'd heard enough. I went quickly to the area where the portal would be, but I got turned around. I suppose all the damn halls looked the same, and when a familiar voice slid up my back, my teeth came together with a clack. "Hey, you get lost?" I turned to find the smiling Wysanther, his head of dandelion fluff dancing as he came up the hall. Yeah, I'm trying to find my way back to the council chamber. This place is so cool, I was just doing a little looking around." I smiled back, trying to keep the dread off my face as he looked at me. "Well, nothing wrong with a little curiosity. Let's get you back to the council chamber." We walked along, Wysanther taking turns with confidence as he navigated the very samey-looking hallway. "You're one of those Brandylow from the park, right?" he asked. I am. I'm the ladies' representative at the council." "Really? Coming up in the world? Good for you." We walked on, and I hoped he wasn't just leading me to a good spot to kill me. If he realized I'd been following him, this could be an attempt to get me out of the way. We walked the halls together, me not daring to even look at him, and he seemed to take this as a sign of something. "I understand," he said, looking up the hall as I dared to glance at him. "I know it's hard on you guys back at the park since she got taken. Don't worry, I'm sure she'll come back soon. I pray daily that your knight comes back with news of her." "Yeah, me too. I'm sure that she will, someday." We came back to the main hall, and I hoped he couldn't smell the blood on my palms. I'd been digging my claws into them, trying to stop myself from shaking, and I was sure that they were bleeding. He stopped, smiled, and looked at me, and it was hard to believe that this was the man who was conspiring against us. He was so nice. He practically exuded positive energy when I had reason to be around him, and if I hadn't known better, I would have doubted myself. It was odd to think that someone so sunny could be such a snake. Well, here we are. If you go exploring again, just remember that Fey buildings have a lot to do with intent. If you know where you're going, then it's easier to get there. Just keep to the place in your mind, and you'll find yourself there. I hope to hear of your lady's return very soon." He bowed, and I returned it, careful not to put my back to him. I thanked him and stepped into the grow house as the room portal disappeared behind me. Tobias looked up from the growing bed, looking a little worried when he saw my face. "Looks as if you might have gotten more from the meeting than you intended. Feel like sharing?" I nodded, and we went to the office to talk it over. Tobias and I had much to discuss, it seemed.